Chapter 667. The movie was a war movie. The sound of gunshots and bombardment filled the entire theater. Shi Mengwan subconsciously turned to look at Xiaoqi. He was very engrossed in the movie. She turned her gaze to look at Zhang Haoze without a trace. He was staring at the screen in front of him, as if he was focused on watching a movie. Shi Mengwan gritted her teeth and gently exerted force with her hand, wanting to pull it back. But his grip was so tight that she couldn't pull it back. If it weren't for the fact that the occasion wasn't right, she would have exploded. Just as she was about to lose control, Zhang Haoze's hand finally let go of her. Shi Mengwan heaved a sigh of relief. She forced herself to focus on the screen, but that person's hand moved to her leg. The sudden touch on her thigh almost made Shi Mengwan jump up from her chair. She held back. She could hold back from jumping up, but she couldn't hold back the hand on her leg. Lin City was very cold in the first month. She wore a red woolen coat when she went out. However, the air conditioning in the theater was on. She felt hot not long after she sat down, so she took off her coat and placed it on her lap. The coat was very big. Zhang Haoze's hand was touching her leg, but he didn't have to worry about anyone seeing it, because it was covered by the coat. Shi Mengwan couldn't put on the coat yet. She could only put her hand into the coat and grab his hand. However, Zhang Haoze held her hand. Not only that, but his hand also began to move towards the direction of her leg. Shi Mengwan's face was red. Half of it was angry, and the other half was embarrassed. She didn't expect Zhang Haoze to be so bold. This was a movie theater. There were so many people around. Not only were there people all around, but Xiaoqi was sitting next to her. She put her other hand under the coat and wanted to grab his hand with both hands. Zhang Haoze let her grab his hand. As she heaved a sigh of relief, he struggled slightly. Shi Mengwan gritted her teeth. She couldn't pay attention to the movie at all. Her mind was filled with the hand that was messing around on her body. She was so angry that she reached out and pinched the back of Zhang Haoze's hand tightly. However, to him, her strength was like scratching an itch. No matter how much strength she used to pinch him, he refused to retract his hand. His actions made Shi Mengwan feel like her face was burning and her body was very hot. His heartbeat was out of control. Half out of fear, half out of shame. She didn't expect that Zhang Haoze would really dare to mess around like this. She tried to grab his hand again, but his hand was pressed between her legs instead. Shi Mengwan's eyes were red. If it weren't for the fact that the occasion wasn't right, she would have screamed. She stabilized her body, and when the next gunshot sounded, she leaned a little in the direction of Zhang Haoze. Zhang Haoze, let go. Zhang Haoze didn't let go. Although they were separated by pants, it still made Shi Mengwan feel extremely ashamed. She lowered her voice, but she couldn't suppress her anger. Don't go too far. Zhang Haoze's movements stopped for a moment, but he did not withdraw his hand. You, leave with me. Zhang Haoze's voice was drowned out by the gunshot. He stuck close to Shi Mengwan's ear. Only they could hear each other's voices clearly. If you don't want me to do more, then come out with me. His breath was slightly warm, and his voice was so low that it was almost a whisper. The theater was clearly very noisy, but she could hear it very clearly. No. She answered with some difficulty. She had agreed to go on a blind date with Xiaoqi, so she couldn't stand him up just like that. Zhang Haoze's gaze was still on the movie screen, but his hand began to move towards the zipper of her pants. Although Lin City was cold, Shi Mengwan had never liked to wear too thick clothes. She was wearing a pair of casual pants today, which weren't thick. As soon as his hand pulled open the zipper, it had already touched her lower abdomen. His fingertips were slightly warm, slender, and had a thin layer of calluses. He was very clear about the sensitive spots on her body, such as her navel. When his hand circled around her navel twice and wanted to go down again, Shi Mengwan was terrified. She grabbed his hand, and her face turned pale from panic. Zhang Haoze. She looked at him, then at Xiaoqi. At this moment, she couldn't help but be glad that she had chosen this war movie. There were constant scenes of fighting, causing all of Xiaoqi's attention to be on the screen. Zhang Haoze was unmoved, and his fingers slid down again. Her voice was trembling. If that hand went down a little more, it would be. She gritted her teeth and pressed down on his hand, but she didn't know that this would increase the area where his hand came into contact with her. Shi Mengwan let go of his hand. She was simply afraid of him. I'll go with you. You go out first. Zhang Haoze's movements finally stopped. He was still watching the movie, but he slowly pulled his hand out. He did it on purpose. He could have pulled his hand out in a second, but he had to pull it out bit by bit. Shi Mengwan's face was burning, and she felt like she was sitting on pins and needles. Zhang Haoze's hand suddenly stopped. He placed his hand under her abdomen and moved his face close to hers. 5 minutes. As he spoke, he finally pulled his hand out. Shi Mengwan's legs went soft. She felt him quietly get up and leave. She felt weak all over and couldn't even stand up. She turned around and glanced at Xiaoqi. He was so engrossed in watching that he didn't notice her and Zhang Haoze's movements at all. She rested for nearly 3 minutes before her body recovered a little strength. She zipped up her zipper again, but it took her a long time to do it. She felt ashamed. She closed her eyes and calmed down. At this time, the movie finally reached a relatively calm scene. She approached Xiaoqi. I'm going to the bathroom. Only then did Xiaoqi turn around and look at her. Okay. Shi Mengwan looked at him and felt a little apologetic. The other party was being honest, but she, gritting her teeth, she picked up her bag and coat and quietly left. When she walked out of the theater, her phone rang. 5 minutes are up. Looking at the words displayed on it, she turned around and searched around. She didn't see Zhang Haoze, and her phone rang again. I'll give you 1 minute. Come to the parking lot. Shi Mengwan gripped her phone tightly and started to walk towards the parking lot. The theater parking lot was very big. She took a look and didn't see Zhang Haoze. She closed her eyes and wanted to turn around and leave. A black Maybach quietly stopped beside her. Inside the car window was Zhang Haoze's expressionless face. Get in the car. Shi Mengwan stood there and didn't move. Zhang Haoze, I thought we had made things clear. I said get in the car. Shi Mengwan stood still. You have no right to ruin my life. Zhang Haoze, please understand. Don't make me say it a third time. It was still the first month, and the cold wind was blowing under the parking lot. Shi Mengwan stood there and refused to get in the car. Zhang Haoze stared at her face for a while and suddenly got out of the car. Before Shi Mengwan could react, he had already walked in front of her. She had just come out of the elevator and was standing next to a pillar. Zhang Haoze took 2 steps forward, and she took 2 steps back. Her back was pressed against the pillar. This sudden question made Shi Mengwan unable to react for a few seconds. After realizing what Zhang Haoze was asking, her little face flushed red. Pervert. You like it, don't you? Zhang Haoze moved forward again. He raised his big hand and pinched her chin with his thumb and index finger. Do you believe that I'll continue here? Are you crazy? Shi Mengwan wanted to break free from his hand. At this moment, Zhang Haoze moved his body forward a little and easily pressed her body against the wall. Or, do you prefer to go back to the theater and continue? He leaned close to her face and placed his other hand on her waist without any hesitation. He easily placed his hand on the hem of her sweater. As long as he reached inside a little more, he could untie her pants. "Do you want to continue?" Shi Mengwan shook her head quickly. Her eyes were red. In terms of being a hooligan and shameless, she was definitely no match for Jean Hauser. However, Jean Hauser didn't retract his hand. He tilted his head and kissed her lips. His other hand gently brushed along the edge of her pants. Shi Mengwan's body trembled. She couldn't even make a sound after being kissed by him. His hand didn't go any further. He only used an extremely slow speed to slowly stroke her waist. Her legs felt weak and she almost couldn't stand. When Jean Hauser ended the kiss, her body had already completely softened. He quickly hugged her. He carried her horizontally, turned around, and put her in the car. A movie in the theater was starting to end, and she saw someone get out. Jean Hauser left the parking lot before there were more people. Shi Mengwan spent more time than before to get her heartbeat and breathing back to normal. She looked at Jean Hauser, who was focused on driving, and thought that she had left Xiao Qi in the theater. She took out her phone and sent a message to Xiao Qi, saying that she had something urgent to attend to and had to leave first. Shi Mengwan was still thinking about how to explain to Xiao Qi when her phone was taken away. Jean Hauser took her phone away and put it into his suit pocket. Jean Hauser turned around and glanced at her. He stepped on the accelerator and the car sped up. Shi Mengwan didn't fasten her seatbelt just now, so she was shocked by his actions. She didn't have the time to care about her phone and quickly fastened her seatbelt. Jean Hauser's car sped out of the city in the night. Shi Mengwan didn't know where he was taking her. She resisted the urge to ask. She had no idea what he wanted to do now, and in fact, she didn't want to know. She only knew that things between her and him were no longer clear. Jean Hauser turned the car around and drove back. The car stopped at Shi Mengwan's apartment. Shi Mengwan picked up her bag and got out of the car. Jean Hauser followed behind her. Neither of them spoke, nor did they open their mouths. They were silent all the way. She walked in front, and he was half a step behind her. They walked all the way into the apartment. When they reached the elevator, Shi Mengwan's phone rang. The movie had ended. Xiao Qi couldn't find her. Jean Hauser took out her phone and glanced at it. When she wanted to reach out to snatch it, he pressed down on her phone. Jean Hauser took a step to the side and pressed her body against the wall. "What about me? Do you want me to answer this call for you?" Crazy. How could she dare to let Jean Hauser answer the phone for her? Shi Mengwan was extremely angry and reached out her hand at him. "Return the phone to me." Jean Hauser glanced at her. With a swipe of his long finger, he pressed it and directly turned off her phone. This person was simply a robber. Shi Mengwan turned around and didn't look at him at all. She pressed the elevator button. After the elevator arrived, she quickly entered. There were surveillance cameras in the elevator, so Jean Hauser didn't go too far. She went upstairs and opened the door. Shi Mengwan wanted to close the door before Jean Hauser came in, but her movements couldn't be faster than Jean Hauser's. She put her bag aside and reached out to push Jean Hauser. He easily restrained her hands, kicked with his long legs, and easily closed the door. In the next second, her body was pressed against the door by him. All the movements were done in one go. Shi Mengwan gritted her teeth. She raised her foot and kicked at Jean Hauser's lower body. Her movements were too ridiculous. Jean Hauser easily blocked her foot, then stretched out his right foot and stuck it between her legs. Shi Mengwan couldn't even kick him now, nor could she resist. Her face was full of red. "Jean Hauser, let go of me." Let go of you and let you go on a blind date with another man. Can't I? Shi Mengwan was furious. Who are you to me? What right do you have to do whatever you want? Do you think I don't have a temper? Her bright red lips opened and closed as she spoke rather impolitely. Jean Hauser narrowed his eyes slightly and grabbed her hands with his big hands. One of his hands unceremoniously wrapped around her waist and pulled her body into his embrace. He lowered his head and kissed her lips again. He kissed her very hard, and that strength was enough to make her lips feel pain. She was so angry that she opened her mouth to bite him. But before she could, he forcefully bit down on her lips. Shi Mengwan was in pain, but Jean Hauser took this opportunity to successfully sneak in. In terms of methods, 10 Shi Mengwans weren't Jean Hauser's match. She could only watch helplessly as he robbed her of her breath and took the initiative. She could even feel the taste of blood in her mouth. He actually bit her lips until they bled. He was simply a lunatic. She was so angry that she bit him back. She used a lot of force this time. She could feel that his lips had been bitten by her. The taste of blood in his mouth became stronger. She didn't know if it was his blood or hers. This was simply a battle. No one was willing to back down first, and no one was willing to admit defeat. Shi Mengwan was a woman after all. She quickly lost. When she was almost suffocated by his kiss, her legs started to go soft and she couldn't stand at all. He easily grabbed her waist and let her stand firm. At the same time, he finally let go of her as if he was kind enough to let her go. He hugged her waist and pressed his forehead against hers. There was blood at the corner of their mouths. Shi Mengwan's breathing was very heavy and urgent. She glared at him and didn't have the strength to struggle. Even if she struggled, he wouldn't let go of her. Chapter 668. Jean Hauser happened to have his head lowered, and she bumped into Jean Hauser's forehead. He was fine, but she couldn't stand the pain. Not only was it painful, but she was also dizzy. She couldn't stand steadily anymore. Her feet were soft. Jean Hauser looked at her. Her forehead was already red. She didn't know if it was her imagination, but she actually saw a faint smile in Jean Hauser's eyes. Crazy. She retreated her head and was so angry that she wanted to bump into him again. However, he easily avoided it and turned her body so that her back was facing him. Let go of me. Shi Mengwan's movements failed. After this, she felt more and more dizzy. Jean Hauser suddenly hugged her by the waist and carried her to the room. Shi Mengwan was already very dizzy, and her head was even dizzier now that he was upside down. When her body was thrown onto the bed by him, the soft Simmons made her body bounce twice. Before she could get up, he had already pressed down on her. Jean Hauser, go away. Her voice was a little hoarse. Before she could finish, he had already taken off her coat. He threw it on the ground beside him, and then the sweater. The sweater was a pullover, so he couldn't take it off at once. When he took it off, she pulled the hem with all her might. A good piece of clothing was torn out of shape. Shi Mengwan's hands were so tight that they turned white. Seeing this, Jean Hauser easily grabbed her hand and raised it above his head. Just as she was about to tear him apart, he tore off the tie around his neck and easily tied her hands. He was very strong. She didn't know how he did it, but her expensive sweater was actually torn apart by him. Pervert, Shi Mengwan cursed. Jean Hauser sneered and stared at her face, which was red from anger. Pervert. I should let you see what a real pervert is. Shi Mengwan watched as he tied her hands to the bed and became afraid. Jean Hauser, let go of me. Don't do this. Jean Hauser was unmoved. He lowered his head and bit her lips hard. When she was in pain, he retreated a little. His lips landed on her cheek, bit by bit, and finally moved to her ear. Didn't you call me a pervert? Today, I will show you how perverted I am. Shi Mengwan still wanted to scold him, but soon, she realized that she couldn't. 5,000 words are omitted below. Please fantasize by yourself. Shi Mengwan's eyes widened as she lay on the bed. There wasn't a single part of her body that wasn't sore, and there wasn't a single part that wasn't uncomfortable. This feeling was even more unbearable than the first time. His body was like a disassembled building block. It was difficult for him to even lift his hand. The bed sheet beneath him was already a mess. She felt terrible, but she couldn't even move to the bathroom. The man beside her had already gotten up and gone to the bathroom. Soon, she heard the sound of water. She tried to turn over, but found that even such a simple movement made her waist very uncomfortable. Pervert. Shi Mengwan gritted her teeth and gave up on getting up. Footsteps sounded behind her. She closed her eyes and refused to pay any attention to the bastard behind her. But at this moment, his body was carried by someone. Jean Hausa. The moment Shi Mengwan said it, she realized how hoarse her voice was. That's enough. She couldn't come again. Jean Hausa directly carried her into the bathroom. He turned on the shower and placed her under the shower. The warm water washed over her body, and she felt much more comfortable. The most important thing was that she really didn't have any strength now. If he didn't carry her to wash like this, she might not have the strength to stand firmly. But, Jean Hausa, what are your hands doing? Helping you shower. He answered expressionlessly, sounding very serious. Nonsense. Shi Mengwan pushed his hand away. I'll shower myself. Are you sure you have the strength? The hidden mockery in that voice made her angry. She tried her best to stand firmly, but she almost fell. He easily lifted her waist and held her steady. At the same time, he successfully made her body completely lean on him. Shi Mengwan was embarrassed and angry. Without waiting for her to completely stand firm, he lifted her body again. Jean Hausa. Shi Mengwan was frightened, and her voice sounded pitiful. Just once. Shi Mengwan only realized after a long time that she was happy too early. This time, it wasn't just once. It was clearly many times. The next day was the 5th day of the new year. Shi Mengwan spent it in bed. On the 6th day of the new year, she still tried it on the bed. Until the 7th day of the new year. For 3 whole days, other than eating and going to the toilet, Shi Mengwan bathed. After showering, she spent the rest of the time on the bed that she had custom-made for comfort. Jean Hausa was like a madman. For the past 3 days, other than eating and sleeping, he hadn't stopped. Shi Mengwan had already given up struggling and resisting. The alarm clock rang. It was set by Shi Mengwan before. Other people could go to work after the 15th day of the first month, but she couldn't. But now, it was very difficult for her to think about it. As soon as the blanket was lifted, she could see the marks on her body. She gritted her teeth and cursed Jean Hausa in her heart again. Then, she gave up on getting up. She closed her eyes and forced herself to ignore the feeling in her body. She didn't even dare to say that Jean Hausa had forced her. After all, if she said that he had forced her, Jean Hausa had many ways to make her willing. He had indeed done it. He had used all means to make her beg for mercy. Shi Mengwan shook off the images in her mind. Any image that came to mind made her feel ashamed. Shi Mengwan reached out to look for her phone. Her phone had been turned off by Jean Hausa for the past few days. She turned on her phone. There were countless text messages and dozens of missed calls. Other than one from Su Qingsang, the rest were all from her family in Shaoqi. It didn't matter if Shi Mengwan didn't return Su Qingsang's call for the time being. However, she couldn't ignore Mother Sher's call. Just as she was about to call Mother Sher, she remembered her current state. In her current state, her mother would definitely be able to tell that something was wrong if she spoke. She thought about it and decided to contact her family later. It didn't matter if Mother Sher called later, but looking at the dozen or so calls and text messages from Xiao-Qi. After thinking for a while, Shi Mengwan called him back. Xiao-Qi. As soon as she called, Shi Mengwan realized that something was wrong. Is it Mengwan? Xiao-Qi picked up the phone almost immediately. Are you okay? I'm fine. Shi Mengwan tried her best to make her voice sound normal. Unfortunately, she had been screaming too hard these past few days, and her voice was almost hoarse. Your voice doesn't sound good. Are you really okay? I'm fine. Shi Mengwan shook her head and swallowed her saliva. I'm really fine. I might just have a cold. So, have you been sick these past few days? Xiao-Qi's words made Shi Mengwan not know how to reply. She paused for a while and cleared her throat. Yes, I fell sick when I came back that day. Because she was lying, she felt especially guilty when she said this. Xiao-Qi didn't hear it, but he heard her weakness. Is it very serious? How are you now? Have you taken your medicine? I heard that your voice is very hoarse. Do you cough? Do you need me to take you to the doctor? The series of words of concern touched Shi Mengwan a little, but she was only touched. No need. I've taken my medicine. I might be fine in 2 days. Sorry, I was rude. Xiao-Qi's voice on the other end of the phone softened. If you don't want me to see you, then I'll call an ambulance for you. Your voice really doesn't sound right. There's really no need. Shi Mengwan shook her head. After realizing that the other party couldn't see her, she tried to raise her voice. I probably haven't been sick for a long time. So, I can't take the sudden cold. I've taken my medicine. I'll be fine after a nap. But you should have been sick for a few days, right? Xiao-Qi paused. Do you know? I couldn't get through to you these past few days, so I thought you didn't want to see me. Xiao-Qi. I think you ran away halfway through the movie that day. I thought I wasn't your ideal type. You were going to reject me in this way. That's not what I meant. Xiao-Qi was indeed not her ideal type, but she didn't want to hurt him. I'm sorry, Xiao-Qi. I really had something to do that day. You mean, I still have a chance, right? Xiao-Qi. Shi Mengwan didn't want to lie to him. She knew very well that Zhang Haoze had left and returned, and she was entangled with him again. She didn't have the right to develop a relationship with Xiao-Qi now. It's okay. If you're not ready, I can give you time. Shi Mengwan didn't know what to say. Do you know? I've seen you before. Xiao-Qi's voice stunned Shi Mengwan. She had no impression of him. Speaking of which, you're considered a celebrity in our town. I've seen you before. Xiao-Qi sighed on the other end of the phone. I knew you'd forgotten about me. But I've never forgotten about you. Xiao-Qi. Shi Mengwan couldn't answer him. Alright, I'm not trying to burden you. Take care of your health. I'll ask you out when you're better, okay? Shi Mengwan was still thinking about how to reject Xiao-Qi when a big hand suddenly appeared on her waist. She was shocked. If it weren't for Xiao-Qi on the other end of the phone, she might have already screamed. Even so, she sucked in a breath of cold air. What's wrong? Xiao-Qi could tell that something was wrong with her voice. Don't tell me you're not even willing to give me such a chance. No. Shi Mengwan's body was lifted up by Zhang Haoze, and he easily held her in his arms. She wasn't wearing clothes, but he was. His hand was holding her waist, and at this moment, his big hand was moving down her waist. "You," she glared at John Hauser, her eyes full of accusation. "Then you're willing to give me this chance?" John Hauser was unmoved. He turned his face and kissed her cheek. She didn't know where he had gone this morning. His lips were very cold. Shi Mengwan grabbed his hand with her hands to prevent him from doing anything rash. At the same time, she had to divert her attention to listen to Xiao Qi's phone call. "Xiao Qi, I'm very sleepy. I want to sleep, it's okay. I said that I'll contact you when you're better." Xiao Qi's voice sounded cheerful. Shi Mengwan responded randomly. She thought that the other party was going to hang up, but Xiao Qi added, "You didn't let me come to see you, so you wasted a chance for me to be attentive." Shi Mengwan was stunned for a moment. Xiao Qi smiled on the other side of the phone. "I'm not lying to you. My cooking skills are not bad. Now that you're sick, I originally wanted to come over and perform well." Xiao Qi. "Alright, I'm just joking. Next time. If you don't mind, I'll cook for you next time." "Okay, aww." Shi Mengwan felt John House's hand on that soft spot. She tried her best to make her voice sound normal. "Then, next time." "Alright, next time." Xiao Qi was satisfied. This meant that he still had a chance. "Then, have a good rest. See you later." "Okay. See you later." Shi Mengwan was a little embarrassed. Almost as soon as she hung up the phone, she immediately turned around to look at John Hauser. She didn't care about the weakness in her body and pulled John Hauser's hand away. She glared at him with indignation. "John Hauser. Are you done?" Her voice was hoarse and her body was weak. These few simple movements were enough to make her pant, especially her waist, which was uncomfortable and sore. John Hauser stopped for a moment. He stared at her face. His eyes were deep, and there seemed to be a hidden storm in them. "Make an appointment with Xiao Qi next time. You want to eat his cooking. You're eavesdropping." "Is this eavesdropping?" Xiao Qi spoke so loudly, did he still need to eavesdrop? "Rascal. I thought you already knew." John House's big hand was placed on her waist, and the threat in his eyes was obvious. "Shameless." John House hugged her waist closer again. He moved closer to her, and the distance between the two of them was less than 5 centimeters. "Do you believe that I can be more shameless?" Of course she believed it. She had already felt it in the past few days. Shi Mengwan gritted her teeth and tried her best to retreat a little. "John Hauser, what do you want?" John Hauser stared at her face for a long time, his long and narrow black eyes gloomy. "Stay away from Xiao Qi." Shi Mengwan was so angry that she almost laughed. "Why should I?" John Hauser looked at her appearance. She had been through too much these few days. She looked a little haggard, but it didn't hurt her beauty. On the contrary, other than her beauty, there was also a sense of tenderness. John Hauser approached her again and sneered. "Do you believe that I'll transfer him to the South Africa branch?" Shi Mengwan was stunned for a moment. She still didn't understand. John Hauser added. "Our company doesn't have a branch in South Africa yet. I think Xiao Qi wouldn't mind being the first person." "Are you threatening me?" "Threatening? If you want to think that way, fine. But I think this is a kind reminder." John Hauser reached out and pinched her chin. His eyes were filled with malice. "If you don't want to harm him, you should know what to do." Shi Mengwan was so angry that her chest rose and fell violently. She bit her lip hatefully and raised her head to glare at John Hauser. "John Hauser, don't go too far." After saying this, she felt that it was ridiculous. It wasn't like she only found out today how outrageous he was. Chapter 669. The room was very quiet. Jean Hauser and her eyes met, and they both saw their own shadows in each other's eyes. Shi Mingwan's face was pale and her expression was haggard. Her lips were slightly swollen. Her eyes were filled with unwillingness, anger, and conflict as she stared at him in pain. Jean Hauser slightly missed her gaze and didn't look at her. His silence, in Shi Mingwan's eyes, meant that he didn't want to let her go. She couldn't help but reach out and grab the front of his clothes. "Tell me. Jean Hauser, what do you want to do for you to let me go?" It had only been a few days, but she felt mentally and physically exhausted. She had always been weak in front of him, and she had never been able to be tough. She hated herself for being like this, but she couldn't control herself. As long as she met him, as long as she encountered something related to him, she would become different from herself. She had clearly made up her mind to get rid of him. She had clearly thought that she had made it clear to him, but what was he doing now? There was still a wound on her lips. He had bitten her a few days ago. He had forgotten to control his strength when he had lost control, and her injury hadn't healed yet. He raised his hand and gently caressed her lips. His movements were very light, but Shi Mingwan slapped his hand away. "Jean Hauser, answer me. What do you want to do for you to let me go? Tell me, tell me." She was really angry. She didn't care about her exhausted body and kept pounding on his chest. To him, that kind of strength was almost like a cat's paw scratching an itch. Before Shi Mingwan could react, he picked her up and put her on the bed. "Jean Hauser," Shi Mingwan's voice was about to turn hoarse. She didn't have any more strength to resist Jean Hauser. She was angry, so she simply closed her eyes and let him be. He could do whatever he wanted. If he didn't want to let her go, what could she do? Jean Hauser found some clothes, picked her up, and put them on for her. Then, he carried her to the bathroom. Her feet indeed didn't have any strength at all. Jean Hauser supported her and let her lean against his chest. He squeezed the toothpaste for her. Putting the toothbrush in her hand, Shi Mingwan looked at Jean Hauser in the mirror. She took the toothbrush and brushed her teeth as if she was venting her anger. She used so much force that her gums were bleeding. Jean Hauser frowned and gently grabbed her hand. Shi Mingwan stopped for a moment. She looked at Jean Hauser's face in the mirror, and he was also looking at her. In the end, she was defeated. She loosened her grip a little and brushed her teeth carelessly, then rinsed her mouth. She wanted to say something, but Jean Hauser picked her up again. This time, he carried her to the dining room outside. There were many small plates on the dining table, filling it to the brim. There were barbecued pork buns, egg tarts, shrimp dumplings, steamed shumai, beef tripe, beef meatballs, salt and pepper duck chin, steamed chicken feet with black bean sauce, spring rolls, fried dough sticks, and steamed buns. There were 2 cups of soy milk and 2 bowls of shrimp porridge on the side. Shi Mingwan looked at Jean Hauser. He put her down and pushed one of the bowls of shrimp porridge in front of her. Shi Mingwan didn't know what to say. She saw the marks on these butterflies. This was a very famous Hong Kong-style tea restaurant nearby. That restaurant's business was very good, and because business was so good, it never delivered takeout. And with so many, don't tell her that Jean Hauser brought it back himself. Eat. Jean Hauser's voice was indifferent. Shi Mingwan didn't have a chance to speak even if she wanted to. She looked at the bowl of steaming porridge and didn't move for a long time. "Do you want me to feed you?" Jean Hauser's long and narrow eyes raised slightly. Shi Mingwan shrunk her neck. Her mind thought of some of the discordant scenes of the past few days. She didn't dare to let him feed her. She picked up the bowl of porridge and found that such a simple action made her hands a little sore. She couldn't help but glare at John Hause again. Before he noticed, she looked away. The porridge tasted good. She had been to this tea restaurant with Su Chingsang before. At that time, she felt that it would be great if the other party was willing to deliver takeout every day. That way, she wouldn't have to wait in line. She could order takeout earlier and eat before going to work. However, the people inside said that because business was too good, even if there was takeout, it wouldn't be delivered, so there wasn't any. Now that she looked at the table full of breakfast, she didn't know how Jean Hause did it. She didn't have a big appetite, but she hadn't eaten well for the past few days. For 3 days in a row, she ate takeout. It was the new year, and many shops were on holiday. She didn't have much choice. Jean Hause was tormenting her again, and she was really hungry. Shi Mengwan, who had eaten more than usual, put down the bowl and looked at Jean Hause in front of her. She couldn't understand him more and more now. Jean Hause didn't eat slowly, but he didn't look rough. He took a big bite, but he chewed slowly. His behavior could even be considered elegant. She thought of what Shao Qi had said before. He said that Jean Hause had founded several companies over the years and had done a lot of things. She had always known that he was an ambitious man. But his achievements today still made her feel a little surprised and shocked. Thinking about it carefully, it seemed very normal. She remembered that he had nothing back then. But he could always conjure something at the critical moment. For example, money, food. For example, the expenses that the two of them needed. She remembered that time when she changed his clothes. His coat was too thick and she couldn't do anything about it. In the end, she could only sew the sleeves a little shorter so that she could wear it as a thick coat. However, because it was too thick, she accidentally pricked her hand. Qiao Zhe, who didn't notice what she was doing, snatched the clothes from her hand in the next second, as well as the needle and thread. The youth put her index finger into his mouth. Shi Mengwan looked at his handsome face and felt a little embarrassed. "I'm fine." She said that, but the youth didn't let go of her. His gaze was fervent, and there seemed to be flames in it. Unfortunately, Shi Mengwan was too young at that time, so she didn't understand at all. The youth let go of her, but didn't let her touch the needle and thread again. Shi Mengwan thought to herself, how could she not touch it? Their lives weren't very good now. Although his clothes weren't completely suitable for her to wear after he changed them, and they were even a little ugly. But wasn't it enough to keep out the cold? Her thoughts at that time were that simple. She thought that after Qiao Zhe left home, she would continue when he wasn't around. The youth brought back 2 sets of brand new clothes the next day. Not only did the youth bring her clothes, but he also brought matching shoes and hair accessories. There were 3 or 4 sets of clothes inside and outside. Although they weren't branded, she wasn't ignorant at that time. She knew that these clothes weren't cheap. Where did you get them? At that time, the youth held her hand and told her, Wan, trust me. I won't let you suffer. Shi Mengwan didn't know that it was a promise. She blinked her eyes. She naturally believed the youth's words. Dear brother, Wan, as long as you follow me, I won't let you suffer. Give him time, he would definitely let her live a good life. That was the youth's promise. Although he was young and immature, he was extremely serious. The chair beside Shi Mengwan was pulled away by someone. She was shocked. When she came back to her senses, she realized that Jean Hause had already finished eating. He had actually taken care of so many things. Once again, he picked her up and placed her on his lap. What were you thinking about just now? He asked. Shi Mengwan bit her lip and couldn't answer Jean House's question. Jean Hauser turned her body around and looked her in the eye. His eyes were dark, and Shi Mengwan couldn't help but think of the youth from back then. It was also the same eyes, and it was also the same serious and solemn expression. But what he did was the complete opposite of what Jean Hauser did. Jean Hauser pinched her chin again, and his brows were tightly knitted. He seemed to be very dissatisfied with the fact that she was always distracted by his side. This time, Shi Mengwan didn't grab his hand. She even bravely raised her head to look at him. Jean Hauser, I'm thinking about you. She held his cheek with her hand and stared at his face. I'm thinking about you. Seeing his slightly furrowed brows, she reached out her hand and gently smoothed it. I'm thinking, why do you want me? I'm thinking, what do you mean? I'm thinking, what do I have to do for you to let me go? Meeting Jean Hauser's eyes, which had become even deeper, she gently raised the corners of her lips. Jean Hauser. Can you tell me? She had already said it several times today, but he hadn't given her an answer even once. Jean Hauser loosened his grip on her chin and pulled her hand away. However, he didn't answer her question. Jean Hauser. Shi Mengwan held his face again. This time, her gaze was very serious. In your heart, am I a prostitute? Jean Hauser's expression suddenly became quite ugly. Shi Mengwan. If you don't treat me like a prostitute, then why are you treating me like this? Shi Mengwan really couldn't understand. The dear brother she liked, admired, and had always been thinking about shouldn't be like this. She stared at him, stubbornly wanting an answer. Although the home clothes she was wearing were thick, they were designed with a large round collar. She held his face like this, and her hands moved forward so that her neckline could be seen clearly in front of him. The green and purple marks on it were all left by him. It also reminded him of how crazy they had been these few days. Jean Hauser felt his body stiffen, but he knew that the other party couldn't take any more. His gaze shifted to the side again. Jean Hauser. He wanted to avoid it, but Shi Mengwan didn't give him a chance to avoid it. Xiao Qi is a blind date arranged by my parents. I'm 26 this year. Perhaps I'm not considered old among the unmarried girls in Lin City. But in our town, many girls of my age are already married and have children. She wasn't someone who followed the crowd, nor was she someone who followed the crowd. She said so much today because that person was Jean Hauser. How other people's lives are has nothing to do with me. But I can't ignore my parents' thoughts. If you don't treat me like a prostitute, then can I treat it as if you also have feelings for me? At least, you like me a little and care a little, don't you? As long as he had feelings for her, she could wait and persevere. Jean Hauser's face was turned straight by her again and he looked at her. Her eyes were fervent, and the light in them made the room lose its color. Compared to him, she was undoubtedly brave. At least in terms of feelings, she was much braver than him. The air was silent, and Jean Hauser was silent. Shi Mengwan's eyes darkened, and she retracted her hand. Jean Hauser. You can go. No matter how much she loved him, she wouldn't lose her dignity and rationality. She wouldn't lower herself to this extent. She retreated a little, and her gaze was cold. She was about to get up and leave, but Jean Hauser reached out and hugged her before she could leave. He wrapped his arms around her tightly and hugged her tightly. Jean Hauser. Shi Mengwan heard his heartbeat. Her voice was very hoarse, but the words she spat out were quite clear. Don't be like this. Jean Hauser didn't let go. He grabbed her waist tightly and pressed his chin against her neck. His body was a little stiff, as if he was enduring it. Jean Hauser, let go of me. She didn't struggle. She no longer had any strength. In 3 days, she had almost exhausted all of her strength. Shi Mengwan. That person finally spoke. His voice was a little hoarse. He called her name. He pressed her face tightly against his chest. When he spoke, she could even hear the vibration of his chest. Give me some time. Shi Mengwan looked up at him. His pitch-black eyes were also looking at her at this moment. She couldn't understand the emotions in them. Give you time. What time? The time to marry me. Shi Mengwan's tone was a little mocking. She didn't believe Jean House's words. Jean House stared at her face and actually nodded. Shi Mengwan looked at him. For a moment, she couldn't tell what she felt. Jean House, give me time, Jean House said again. Shi Mengwan lowered her eyes. She heard the sound of her heart beating. It was the desire in the depths of her heart. She really wanted to marry her dear brother and spend the rest of her life with him. The anticipation in the depths of her heart made her not even have time to think about more realistic problems. You, really? If she didn't like him, she naturally wouldn't be so worried about gains and losses. But if she liked him and fell in love with him, there was nothing she could do. It was impossible for her to act according to her own subjective will. Jean House looked at her and nodded. Shi Mengwan was very excited, but the more excited she was, the calmer she appeared. She just stared at Jean House, and he was also looking at her. Shi Mengwan blinked and tried to calm herself down. How long? Seeing that Jean House didn't say anything, he only frowned slightly, as if he was in a difficult position. Shi Mengwan smiled bitterly. You can't make me wait forever, can you? She didn't believe in the saying that a woman's youth was limited, but she had her own problems right now. She couldn't ignore Grandma Shi's 2-year period. Looking at Grandma Shi's body, it wouldn't be a problem for her to live to 100 years old. At that time, if she didn't bring a man back, what would happen to Grandma Shi? Jean House, tell me, how long do you want me to wait for you? There was silence. Jean House's thin lips pursed into a straight line. He looked like he was in a difficult position. Shi Mengwan felt that she couldn't continue the conversation. She thought that she had already done everything a girl could do. What else did Jean House want? Jean House. She forcefully got up from his arms and took a big step back. Her feet were still a little soft. Such a simple action made her feel uncomfortable in the place that she couldn't tell others about. She gritted her teeth and forced herself to ignore the feeling in her body. You can go. Jean House held her hand before she wanted to go back to her room. It won't be long. It won't be long. Shi Mengwan really wanted to ask him, how long would it be? But she couldn't ask. She looked at Jean House. His eyes were like a deep spring. She was deeply immersed in them. She was once again pulled into his arms. He lowered his head and kissed her gently. He wasn't as rough as he had been these few days, nor was he as overbearing as before. He kissed her gently, bit by bit, and he carefully traced the shape of her lips. The strong Jean House would make it impossible for Shi Mengwan to refuse, but such a gentle Jean House made Shi Mengwan confused. She slowly closed her eyes and allowed herself to be intoxicated by his kiss. He finally retreated a little when she was almost suffocated. He pressed his forehead against hers. His breathing was also a little heavy and a little breathless. Give me some time. His voice was slightly hoarse as he uttered those words in an extremely soft voice. Shi Mengwan looked into his eyes and finally nodded weakly. Her body was carried by him again, but he didn't go to the room. Instead, he went to the living room. Do you want to watch a movie? Jean House asked her. Shi Mengwan blinked at him. Although she didn't understand what he meant, she still nodded. She got up and chose a movie called Life is Beautiful. Shi Mengwan had seen this movie before, but it had been too long, so she had forgotten many of the plot. The film festival played very slowly, and she slowly recalled the plot along with the movie. Her eyes were a little red. When she saw Guido take a very ridiculous step and die under the muzzle of Na Chui, Shi Mingwan's eyes fell. There was a tissue in front of her. She took it and wiped her tears away. She sniffed and found that Jean Hauser was staring at her. She suddenly didn't want him to see her like this. She turned her face and continued to focus on the plot. The movie ended very quickly, but her emotions didn't come out of that kind of environment. Her body was turned around by Jean Hauser. He raised his hand, as if he couldn't understand the change in her emotions. Why are you crying? Don't you feel touched? Jean Hauser looked at her expressionlessly and didn't say anything. There was no need to say anything to know that he probably didn't feel anything at all. If you're not touched, why did you say you wanted to watch a movie? Jean Hauser turned his gaze away and picked up the remote control to watch another movie. Shi Mengwan seemed to have realized something. You didn't say you wanted to watch a movie because Xiao Qi asked me to watch a movie yesterday, did you? Jean Hauser turned around and glared at her. Soon, he looked at the screen again. However, Shi Mengwan clearly saw that his earlobes were slowly turning red. This realization stunned her for a moment. She bit her lip. For a moment, she thought that there was something wrong with her eyes. Are you jealous of Xiao Qi? Shi Mengwan asked subconsciously. In the next second, she saw that Jean Hauser's earlobes were even redder. At this moment, Jean Hauser turned around and glared at her. His gaze looked very fierce. Shi Mengwan seemed to have discovered something extraordinary. She still wanted to say something. However, Jean Hauser kissed her lips. It was a kiss that was rougher than before, not giving her a chance to speak. Shi Mengwan blinked her eyes. There was a faint smile in her bright and beautiful eyes. They were extremely bright, like stars in the sky. However, Jean Hauser raised his hand to cover her eyes and deepened the kiss. Bit by bit, his lips stole her breath and occupied it. His hands also started to be dishonest. Shi Mengwan wanted to get rid of his hand, but he pushed her down on the sofa and covered her eyes with the silk towel she had used before. When her eyes couldn't see, her senses would become especially sharp. The weather was still cold. Shi Mengwan bit her lip. Not here. The man seemed to want to punish her for mocking him just now. Not only did he not let go of her, but he also firmed his determination to do it here. She couldn't resist, so she could only dance with him. At night, Shi Mengwan, who was sleeping on the bed, righteously rejected Jean Hauser and didn't let him continue. She had really been tortured by him too much these few days. If he continued, her waist would definitely break. Jean Hauser stared at her face for a long time, but in the end, he really didn't continue. He hugged her waist and pressed his chin against the top of her hair. The lights in the room had already been turned off, leaving only a bedside lamp. Shi Mingwan's back was facing Jean Hauser. She looked at the small lamp and her voice was very soft. Jean Hauser. He didn't respond, but Shi Mengwan knew that he wasn't asleep. Don't you need to go to work? It was already past the 7th day of the Chinese New Year. Normally speaking, many companies would have already started work. No need. Because he was lying down, his voice sounded a little hoarse, but it was especially sexy. Shi Mengwan thought of what Xiao Qi said. You're starting a company now? Yes. Pretty good. She still remembered the young man who had nothing more than 10 years ago. At that time, he said that he had to earn a lot of money and that he would give her a good life. Does your company make money? Yes. That's good. Shi Mengwan nodded gently. At this moment, he turned her body around and let her face him. She looked up at him. Can you tell me about you? She wanted to know more about him, such as where he had been all these years and what else he had done other than starting a company. Didn't he have no home or parents? Then how did he go to university? She had a lot of questions to ask, but Jean Hauser pressed her face against his chest. Sleep. Jean Hauser, if you don't sleep, I'll do something to make you want to sleep. Shi Mingwan's face was a little red, so she really didn't ask. If he didn't want to tell her, she wouldn't ask. When he wanted to tell her, she would ask. She sighed slightly in her heart. She didn't open her eyes. Instead, she rubbed her face against his chest. Jean Hauser. Yes. 2 years. What? I'll wait for you for 2 years. Shi Mingwan's voice was very soft. She already wanted to sleep. These few days, she really didn't have much time to sleep. She didn't hear Jean Hauser's response, and she didn't need his response. If you can't marry me in 2 years, I'll find a random man to marry, she said. Jean Hauser stared at her face, but she seemed to be completely asleep and didn't make a sound. After a long time, her steady breathing could be heard, confirming that she had really fallen asleep. 2 years. Chapter 670. Shi Mengwan, who had slept well the night before, was in good spirits when she woke up in the morning. She decided to visit Xiang Kaiping today. She had been with Jean Hauser for the past few days and hadn't gone out. When she woke up in the morning, breakfast was already on the dining table. Jean Hauser was in charge of Shi Mingwan's 3 meals these days. She knew that he didn't buy it, but she felt the same in her heart. The rebellious young man only knew to wait for her to prepare breakfast and wake him up to eat. Jean Hauser was outside the balcony, seemingly answering a phone call. She couldn't hear what he was saying. She wanted to go over and ask, but Jean Hauser had already hung up. Shi Mengwan looked at his suit and leather shoes. This suit didn't seem to be left with her before. She knew that he woke up very early every day. Did someone send it to him? Are you going out today? To work. Jean Hauser sat down at the dining table. That word could be considered an explanation. Shi Mengwan sat down opposite him. She looked at his expression and thought of something. Then, will you come back tonight? Jean Hauser's hand that was picking up the chopsticks paused for a moment. He glanced at her, then nodded. Yes. Shi Mengwan didn't even notice that her eyes lit up because of Jean Hauser's word. Then you should be early. I have nothing to do today anyway. I'll go buy ingredients to make dumplings in the afternoon. After dinner, Jean Hauser went to work. Shi Mengwan looked at the empty room, and for the first time, a real smile appeared on her face. Now, let's leave it like this for now. This is also good. She cleaned up the dishes and went to the bathroom to get Jean Hauser's clothes, intending to wash them. However, when she saw his clothes, she realized that Jean Hauser's clothes needed to be dry cleaned. She washed her own clothes and tidied up the house. Shi Mengwan carried Jean Hauser's clothes downstairs and went to a nearby dry cleaner to wash the 2 sets of clothes that Jean Hauser had left there. Then, she went to the hospital to accompany Xiang Kaiping for a while. After the 7th day, Su Qingsang had already started work. The hospital she stayed in was the largest hospital in Lin City, so Su Qingsang was very busy. Shi Mengwan didn't expect that Xiang Kaiping would actually want to introduce her. She found a good doctor in the hospital. Speaking of which, Shi Mengwan had seen that man before. He used to pursue Su Qingsang. Although Su Qingsang didn't know anything about it, as a bystander, how could Shi Mengwan not know that the persons Hongchen liked was Su Qingsang? She was so frightened by Xiang Kaiping that she even refused to have lunch with Xiang Kaiping. She was afraid that if she stayed any longer, Xiang Kaiping would ask Su Qingsang to bring them over. That would be really embarrassing for her. After leaving the hospital, she received a call from Su Qingsang. Su Qingsang couldn't stop laughing. Don't worry, my mother just said it casually. She was too bored staying in the hospital. I know. But your mother is really too passionate. I can't take it anymore. He was so concerned about her personal problems that she was under a lot of pressure. It's better if you can't take it, Su Qingsang said half jokingly and half seriously. Maybe you'll really meet your true love. Qingsang. All right. I won't tease you anymore. Su Qingsang had always known about the knot in her heart. But I really think that you should stop waiting for that big brother of yours. It's been so long. He's too unreliable. Qingsang. Sure, Mengwan wanted to say that it wasn't unreliable at all. She had already met him now, and they were very close. But Su Qingsang wouldn't believe that. She was also too embarrassed to say it. All right, I'm just saying. You still have to rely on yourself. Su Qingsang had tried to persuade her many times, but she had stopped a long time ago. It was just a casual mention. After hanging up the phone, Sure Mengwan was a little lost in thought. Unreliable. Thinking about it seriously, it was true. Jean Hauze didn't say that he wanted to marry her, and he didn't confirm her identity. Now that they were like this, it felt a little shameful to talk about it. After all, Jean Hauze didn't seem to be willing to reveal her identity now. She really looked like she was going to throw herself at him. What she said before she fell asleep yesterday was true. 2 years. She gave Jean Hauze 2 years, and she also gave herself 2 years. In 2 years, if she couldn't move Jean Hauze to marry her, then she would give up. But before that, she always wanted to give herself a chance. She had waited for more than 10 years and searched for more than 10 years. When she thought there was no hope, she found it and met it. No matter what the final way out for her and Jean Hauze was, whether it was a calamity or fate, she would accept it. At least, she didn't want to regret her youth. She looked at the blue sky above her head. The weather was really good, and she was actually in a good mood. No matter what, she had waited for her dear brother. This result was already very good for her. There were some things that she wouldn't regret as long as she tried her best. Chen Feifei sat in Jean Hauze's office. She looked at Jean Hauze's position with unfriendly eyes. She had been waiting for Jean Hauze for half an hour. Half an hour, but Jean Hauze still hadn't appeared. She stood up and walked outside, looking at Lo Axan, who was sitting outside. Where did Jean Hauze go? Don't tell me you don't know. Miss Chen, I really don't know. You don't know? Chen Feifei sneered. If you don't know, then how did you become a secretary? Lu Axan stood there and bent down to listen to Chen Feifei's temper. That attitude made Chen Feifei even angrier. She stood up and pointed at Lu Axan. Tell me. Where did Jean Hauze go? Lu Axan had seen Chen Feifei's appearance in front of Jean Hauze. She was like a completely different person. He lowered his back and looked very respectful. Miss Chen, although President Jean is my boss, he really doesn't need to report everything to me. So it's normal that I don't know where he went. Chen Feifei stood up and stomped her feet angrily. She turned around and went to Chen Yongchang's office. Chen Yongchang had just returned from a meeting. As soon as he entered the office, he saw his beloved daughter looking unhappy. What's wrong? Who made our baby angry? Who else? Chen Feifei stood up. Or is it Jean Hauze? He hasn't been home for days. As she spoke, she went forward and hooked Chen Feifei's hand. Dad, what kind of work did you give Brother Hao? Look, it's not even the 15th yet, and he's already so busy. Chen Yongchang looked at Chen Feifei with a complicated gaze. He only said for a moment, "Don't be too willful. You know that I've arranged work for Hausa. When he's done, he'll naturally come back." "Dad. I just want him to accompany me. You're not allowed to arrange any more work for him. Look at you. I've really spoiled you." After Chen Yongchang finished speaking, he patted her hand. "Don't forget that Hausa is not only in charge of our company's business, but also his own company's business. Speaking of this, I'm even angrier." Chen Feifei pouted. "Isn't our family's company big? Brother Hao still wants to open a company outside. You shouldn't have agreed to let Brother Hao open a company outside." Chen Yongchang glared at Chen Feifei. "Jean Hausa is talented. Even if I don't agree with his ability, do you think he won't open a company outside?" Back then, Jean Hausa had only just graduated from high school, and he had already asked him to borrow money to invest in a fund. At first, he was unwilling, but he didn't expect that he had misjudged him. Jean Hausa actually had that kind of ability. In one summer vacation, he had earned his first $1,000,000. Later, his wealth had increased by leaps and bounds in the past few years. If it weren't for the fact that the Qin family still owed Jean Hausa a debt of gratitude, he felt that Jean Hausa might really have left the Qin family. Besides, Dad is doing it for you." A hint of calculation flashed across Chen Yongchang's eyes, but it appeared so quickly that Chen Feifei didn't see it. "Do you know how much Jean Hausa's technology company is worth now? Do you know how much the website he invested in is worth now? All of this will be yours in the future." Chen Feifei bit her lip and looked at Chen Yongchang worriedly. "Dad, I don't want any company. I just want Brother Hao to accompany me." "Nonsense." Chen Yongchang glared at his daughter and realized that his attitude was too harsh. In the end, he softened his tone. "Feifei, let me tell you, Jean Hausa is too scheming. I'm just afraid that you'll suffer a loss." "Then why don't you ask Brother Hao to marry me as soon as possible? Look, a grown girl can't be kept at home. Do you really want to get married as soon as possible? Don't you want to accompany Dad for a few more years? Dad, if I marry Brother Hao, he'll still live at home in the future. Not only can I accompany you, but you'll also have a son. You." Chen Yongchang smiled. "All right, you can go. Leave this matter to Dad. Don't worry, I'll definitely get your Brother Hao to marry you. Dad is the best." Chen Feifei kissed Chen Yongchang on the face before turning around and leaving. After she left, Chen Yongchang called his secretary, Little Wang. "Secretary Wang, check where Jean Hausa has been these few days." "Yes." Secretary Wang left. Chen Yongchang thought about his plan and picked up the phone to dial another number. Before Shi Mengwan bought it home, she really went to buy the ingredients to make dumplings. When she returned home, Jean Hausa hadn't returned yet. She went into the kitchen, put everything away, and tidied up. The dumpling skin was ready-made and sold. She just needed to mix the stuffing. It wasn't too difficult for her. After washing the vegetables and chopping the stuffing, she couldn't help but think of her dear brother again. That year, they spent the New Year together. That was their first year together. The winter in Lin City was especially cold, but it didn't snow. Near the bungalow Shi Mengwan and the others lived in, there was a young couple from the north. The two of them couldn't go home for the New Year, so they started to prepare for the New Year early. Shi Mengwan happened to pass by and saw it, so she felt that she should also prepare. "Dear brother, can we also make dumplings for the New Year?" "Make dumplings?" The young man who returned home took off his coat. When he heard this, he frowned. "You know how to?" "A little." Shi Mengwan nodded. "I saw my mother make dumplings before and helped." However, I didn't do it myself. It's too troublesome. Don't do it. It's the new year. Everyone eats dumplings. Eating dumplings makes it more festive. Let's go. How about we go buy the ingredients? The young man couldn't win against Shi Mengwan, so he followed her to pick the ingredients. When Shi Mengwan really wanted to do it, she realized that it wasn't as easy as she thought. Usually, it was very easy to see her mother do this, but now that she bought the ingredients herself, she realized that it was very difficult. The stuffing was fine. She learned to mix it and it would be fine. It was either a little salty or a little bland. However, the dumpling skin made Shi Mengwan a little difficult. In the past, it was Shi Mengwan's mother who mixed the dough at home, and she helped her. However, it was her first time rolling the dough skin herself. When she really kneaded the dough skin into a ball, she realized that it was very difficult to roll the dough skin into thin slices. She tried several dumpling skins, but they all failed. They were either too thin or too thick. The young man crossed his arms in front of his chest and looked at her movements. He sneered. Are you sure you can? The young girl was very embarrassed. She had never been so embarrassed before. I'll try again. I'll definitely be able to do it. The young man looked at her mockingly. Forget it. If you don't know how, we'll eat something else today. No. I definitely will. Shi Mengwan was very stubborn. Today was New Year's Eve. Wasn't New Year's Eve supposed to be eaten with dumplings? However, Shi Mengwan tried again, but the result was actually too thin. It actually broke. Her face was red. I don't believe I won't succeed. She was a very stubborn person. She stubbornly decided that she had to succeed. He picked up another ball of dough and tried again. This time, he didn't know why, but he actually pressed down on his hand. The young man looked at her actions and reached out to take the rolling pin in her hand. Let me do it. Shi Mengwan looked at the young man. She couldn't believe that he actually knew how to roll dumpling skins. Are you joking? Let me do it. I'll just try a few more times. The young man didn't even raise his head. He picked up the small ball of dough and pressed it with his palm. Then, he copied Shi Mengwan's actions and started rolling it. The first one was too thick and failed. The second one was too thin and failed again. Shi Mengwan bit her lip. While she was still thinking about how to not hurt the young man's third dumpling skin was already done. Here. Shi Mengwan looked at the dumpling skin and for a moment, she thought that there was something wrong with her eyes. Dear brother. She picked up the small dumpling skin. Have you rolled it before? No. The young man's hands didn't stop moving. He had mastered the trick and his movements were fast and good. Shi Mengwan was speechless. The young man felt her gaze and raised his head slightly. What? Aren't you going to wrap it? Yes, I'll wrap it. Shi Mengwan felt that this was simply unfair. She picked up the very even piece of dumpling skin and looked at the young man's movements. How did you know? I knew it from watching you do it. Shi Mengwan's pretty face was full of dissatisfaction. I've also seen my mother do a lot. The young man glanced at her. You're short. Because she was short, she couldn't exert strength, or it wasn't easy for her to exert strength. Shi Mengwan almost choked on her own saliva. How am I short? Although she was 13 years old, she was already more than 1.5 meters tall. She wasn't considered short among her peers at all, okay? Her gaze fell on the young man, and she lowered her head dejectedly. All right, compared to Qiao Zhe, she was indeed short. After the new year, Qiao Zhe had grown a lot taller. Now, he was probably 1.8 meters tall. She was very depressed, but her hands didn't stop wrapping the dumplings. She didn't know how to roll dough, but she still knew how to make dumplings. After all, she had helped a lot at home in the past. Just like that, one of them rolled the dumpling skin, and the other made the dumpling skin. Unexpectedly, their movements were very fast. It was getting late, in this small house with nothing. The two young men and women wrapped the dumplings together. Halfway through, Shi Mengwan glanced at Xiao Zhe. "Dear brother, do you have coins?" "Why do you want coins?" "Wrap them in dumplings. Whoever eats them later will be very lucky next year." The young man glanced at her with a hint of mockery in his eyes. "Superstition. How is it superstition? Isn't it all like this?" Shi Mengwan bit her lip, thought for a moment, and shook her head. No. Coins are very dirty. Let's use peanuts." Previously, they had bought some snacks, including a bag of peanuts. Shi Mengwan ran over and peeled 2 peanuts. She took out the peanuts inside and wrapped them in 2 dumplings. She looked up at Xiao Zhe. "Dear brother, I'll wrap 2. There are 2 peanuts in each. This is a pair. When the time comes, we'll each have a pair of peanuts. This way, our luck will be very good next year." The young man didn't think much of it, and his eyes were filled with disdain. Shi Mengwan was in high spirits. After wrapping them, she placed the 2 in the middle of the dumplings. "I'll mess them up. When the time comes, it'll really depend on luck." She said it excitedly, as if she would be able to get one for each of them as she thought. After wrapping it, Shi Mengwan took the dumplings and put them into the pot. "Big brother, wait a moment. There will be dumplings to eat soon." While cooking the dumplings, Shi Mengwan didn't forget to stir-fry 2 dishes. Usually, they wouldn't be so extravagant, but today was New Year's Eve. No matter what, they should at least have some New Year's atmosphere, right? The dumplings were cooked and the dishes were served. The steaming hot dumplings made people feel much better. "Big brother, have some dumplings." Shi Mengwan's dumplings were pretty good. Although they weren't as exquisite as the ones sold in restaurants, they were all very plump and well-proportioned. Xiao Zhe glanced at her, picked up a dumpling, and took a bite. "How is it, big brother? How does it taste?" The young man glanced at her and nodded in affirmation. Then, he lowered his head and continued eating. Shi Mengwan tasted one and felt that it was not bad. She laughed. "Dear brother, my skills are not bad. I think we can open a dumpling restaurant. I'll be in charge of making the dumplings, and you'll be in charge of rolling the dumpling wrappers. How about that?" The young man stopped eating the dumplings and looked up at her. "Didn't you say you wanted to be a fashion designer?" Shi Mengwan's expression was awkward for a moment. Then, she said with a matter-of-fact expression, "Then we can open a dumpling restaurant first. After we earn money, we can go learn fashion design." The young man didn't say anything and just quietly ate the dumplings. "Dear brother, there's more inside. Eat more. It's the new year today." The young man was halfway through eating when he picked up a dumpling. He seemed to have bitten something hard and his movements froze. "What's wrong?" Shi Mengwan suddenly perked up. "You ate peanuts. That's great. Dear brother, your luck will definitely be very good in the future." Xiao Zhe didn't believe this at all, but very quickly, he ate a second peanut. "Dear brother. You ate peanuts again. You're so lucky." Shi Mengwan's eyes were pure congratulations, without any reluctance. Xiao Zhe was stunned for a moment, but he put the remaining peanut into Shi Mengwan's bowl. "Here. Big brother. Didn't you say that my luck would be good? I will share my good fortune with you. Shi Mingwan's eyes immediately turned red. Dear brother, let's eat. The young man was a man of few words. Shi Mingwan lowered her head to eat, but tears fell without warning. Big drops of tears fell into the bowl. The youth was stunned for a moment. Shi Mingwan bit her lip and couldn't say anything. In this half a year, she could force herself not to miss home and her family. But today was New Year's Eve. At this time, he couldn't help it. No matter how unreasonable her grandmother was, she still had her mother, father, and her younger sister who was only a few months old. She had been away from home for a few months, and she didn't know how her sister was doing. She also didn't know if her parents would still think of sending her sister away after she left. She missed her mother even more. When she left home, her mother had just finished her confinement. She could still help her mother at home, but if she wasn't at home, who would help her mother with the housework? The more she thought about it, the sadder she felt. The more she thought about it, the more she missed her family. Tears would fall as if they were free. The youth rarely saw Shi Mingwan cry. Since the two of them knew each other, most of the time, Shi Mingwan was cheerful and sunny. It was rare for her to be like this. He looked at her and suddenly got up to get the bag of peanuts. He took out 2 peeled ones and placed them in Shi Mingwan's bowl. What good luck or bad luck? I think it's all the same. Shi Mingwan was still sad just now, but when she saw the youth's actions, she burst into laughter. Dear brother. She didn't mean that. I don't want to eat lucky dumplings. She sniffled and didn't dare to face the youth's eyes. I just miss home. She wiped the tears in her eyes and looked at John Hausa. I miss my father, my mother, and my little sister. The youth looked at her, a little dazed. His brows were tightly furrowed, as if he had thought of something. If you really miss home, then go back. Shi Mingwan looked at him and suddenly shook her head. No, I'm not going back. She missed home very much, but she couldn't go back. She was very afraid that if she went back, her parents would send her little sister away again. Dear brother. Shi Mingwan wiped the tears in her eyes and looked at John Hausa. What about you? It's the new year today. Don't you miss your parents? The youth's expression could be considered gentle just now, but his face was suddenly stained with a layer of gloominess. At this moment, his eyes were filled with malice and malice. My father and mother are both gone. This was the first time Shi Mingwan had heard John Hausa mention his parents after being together for so long. She was stunned. Looking at the indifference in the youth's eyes, she felt a stabbing pain in her heart. She suddenly reached out and hugged the youth. It's okay, dear brother. From now on, I'll be your family. The youth didn't say anything. This was the first time Shi Mingwan took the initiative to hug him. He lowered his head to look at her. The young girl had just come out of the kitchen, and there was still the smell of smoke on her body. He really felt like a family member. He reached out to hug the young girl. The youth didn't say anything. Family. This feeling seemed pretty good. Chapter 671. Shi Mingwan had already made more than half of the dumplings. She was very quick at wrapping dumplings. Strangely, after so many years, she had never learned how to roll dumpling wrappers. He never would. At home, Mother Shi was the one who rolled the dough. She only needed to wrap it. She was afraid of trouble when she went out, not to mention that there were ready-made dumpling skins for sale now. You're back. Dinner will be ready soon. The kitchen was very small, so Shi Mingwan made dumplings on the dining table. The stuffing was mixed in a large basin, and 2/3 of it had already been wrapped up. John Hausa stepped forward and watched Shi Mingwan's movements. She had a pair of extremely beautiful hands. Her fingers were slender and smooth. She wrapped the dumplings very quickly and looked very pleasing to the eye. Jean Hausa pulled out the chair in front of the dining table and sat there watching Shi Mengwan make dumplings. Shi Mengwan felt uncomfortable under his gaze, and her hands stopped moving for a moment. What happened? Seeing that Jean Hausa didn't speak, she pouted and said, "Will you? Do you need help?" "I won't." Those 3 words were spoken in a low voice. Shi Mengwan knew that he wouldn't, so she stopped looking at him. She quickly wrapped the dumplings and put them away. Then he went into the kitchen to boil water. When the water boiled, she found the cured meat and sausages that Mother Shi had asked her to bring to Lin City before she came back. She calculated the portions, cut them, and then stir-fried 2 dishes. When she took the dishes out of the pot, she found that Jean Hausa had been staring at her at the door. The corners of Shi Mengwan's lips curled up slightly. "Wait a minute, the dumplings will be ready soon." As she spoke, she handed one of the dishes to Jean Hausa. "Please take it out." Jean Hausa didn't expect her to ask him to serve the dishes. He stared at the dishes in her hand for a few seconds and finally reached out his hand. "There's also this." Shi Mengwan smiled and glanced at the processing table. Jean Hausa placed the dishes on the table outside. Shi Mengwan looked at the dumplings. They were ready to be cooked. She scooped out the dumplings and brought them to the dining table outside. "All right, bring 2 bowls over." Jean Hausa had already sat down. Because of Shi Mengwan's words, he glanced at her and finally got up to get the bowl. Shi Mengwan had a faint smile in her eyes. Some things required a sense of participation. This was her home. Jean Hausa was now her man. She had to let him feel a sense of participation. There were many things that required 2 people to do together in order to improve their relationship. She hoped that their relationship could be enhanced outside of the bed, not just in bed every time they had an exchange of feelings. Seeing Jean Hausa sit down with the bowl, Shi Mengwan put the dumplings into his bowl. "How about trying it?" Jean Hausa tasted one, looked up at her, and nodded. Shi Mengwan's eyes turned red because of his reaction. However, this time, she controlled herself and didn't let herself lose her composure. She lowered her head and ate the dumplings quietly. "My mom made this. So is this." Actually, when she was with dear brother back then, Shi Mengwan had also thought of getting some New Year's goods. But at that time, she was really too young to know. She couldn't now either, but she could let him taste her mother's cooking. Shi Mengwan made a lot of dumplings. "It's only half cooked." She put the rest in the freezer so that she could cook it the next time she wanted to eat it. And the food she cooked all went into Jean Hausa's stomach. She really couldn't help but sigh. His appetite was really good. After dinner, Shi Mengwan cleaned up the kitchen. When she came out, Jean Hausa pulled her to sit down on the sofa. His hand was on her waist and he held her in his arms. Shi Mengwan felt a little uncomfortable. She was too full, and Jean Hausa's actions made her feel dangerous. "Jean Hausa, how about we go for a walk?" She grabbed his hand away. Shi Mengwan really didn't want to do such exercise right after dinner. It was too tiring. "We're too full tonight. We should go for a walk to digest our food, don't you think?" Jean Hausa's hand was still on her waist. Shi Mengwan wasn't confident that he would agree to her request, but no matter what, she had to give it a try. "Let's go. Go for a walk." Jean Hausa stood up. Shi Mengwan was happy. She went to get her coat. She had already gone out today, and her coat was hanging at the entrance. She took the keys and phone and put them in her pocket. She looked at Jean Hausa with shining eyes. After going downstairs, Shi Mengwan felt a little regretful. The sun was out during the day, and the temperature in Lin City was still okay. She could still tolerate it. But it was night now, and Lin City was near the sea. The wind was strong, and the temperature was low. A gust of wind blew over, and Shi Mengwan couldn't take it anymore. It's so cold. Why was it so cold? She seemed to have heard the weather forecast that it would cool down again, but she didn't expect it to be so cold. She reached out and rubbed her palms. Just as she was about to put her hand back into her pocket, Jean Hauser reached out to hold her hand and put her hand into his pocket. His hand was very big, and it tightly wrapped around hers. Shi Mengwan's mind flashed for a moment. Looking at Jean Hauser's deep profile, she bit her lip and couldn't help but feel a trace of joy in her heart. She knew that her dear brother was like this. She moved her face closer to Jean Hauser's arm and rubbed it. The smile on Shi Mengwan's face became brighter. Jean Hauser felt her movements and turned to look at her. He didn't say much, but the expression on his face became much gentler. The next day, it rained in Lin City. When Jean Hauser left the company, he received a call from Chen Yongchang saying that something had happened to Chen Feifei. When Jean Hauser rushed back to the Chen family, the doctor had just left. Chen Feifei was lying on the bed with a pale face. Chen Yongchang stood at the side, his face full of concern. "Uncle." Jean Hauser looked at Chen Yongchang and his gaze fell on Chen Feifei's face. "Is Feifei okay? She has an old illness. It's not like you don't know." Chen Yongchang glanced at Jean Hauser as he spoke. "You haven't come back for the past few days. Feifei misses you too much. She ran out to look for you, but you know, the temperature dropped yesterday. Feifei's health isn't good, so when she was drenched in the rain, she got sick." Jean Hauser didn't say anything, but Chen Feifei, who was on the bed, glanced at her father. "Dad, don't blame Brother Hao. It's not like Brother Hao didn't come to see me on purpose. You know that Brother Hao is busy with work. Feifei, you." Chen Yongchang looked at his daughter with a conflicted expression. He seemed to be helpless that his daughter always valued Jean Hauser more than him. "Hauser." Chen Yongchang looked at Jean Hauser. "Originally, this wasn't your fault. But Feifei is very weak now, so you should accompany her." As he spoke, Chen Yongchang walked out. The room quieted down, leaving only Jean Hauser and Chen Feifei. After Chen Yongchang left, Chen Feifei reached out to pull Jean Hauser's hand. "Brother Hao, Dad is too worried about me." "It has nothing to do with you. Please don't be angry." "I'm not angry." Jean Hauser wanted to pull his hand out, but Chen Feifei held it tightly. "Brother Hao, are you really not angry?" Her face was full of uneasiness at this time, as if she was really afraid that Jean Hauser would be angry. Jean Hauser pursed his lips into a straight line and shook his head gently. Chen Feifei was satisfied, and a gentle smile appeared on her face. But her hands were still holding his hand tightly. "Brother Hao, what have you been busy with these days? I miss you very much. When I call you, you always say that you have something to do. When I go to your company, I can't find you. Do you know how worried I am about you? There are a lot of things to do at the company." Jean Hauser looked at Chen Feifei and resisted the urge to pull his hand back. "No matter how busy the company is, you still have to take care of your health. Just look at me and you will understand. Ever since I was young, I have been a patient. Now that I have grown up, not only can I not help you, but I will also tire you out. It's nothing." Jean Hauser's voice was very indifferent. His indifference didn't just start today. Ever since Chen Feifei saved Jean Hauser and brought him home, he had always been like this. However, the more Jean Hauser was like this, the more Chen Feifei couldn't stop herself. She always wanted to get John Hausa. Brother Hao, you don't have to comfort me. I know that you have always thought of me as a burden, so you don't want to tell me anything about the company or the outside world. But Brother Hao, I really like you. Chen Feifei's eyes were fixed on John Hausa. She could clearly see that those eyes were all about him. I know. Chen Feifei bit her lip. She was still a little hurt by John Hausa's reaction. Brother Hao, what about you? Do you like me? John Hausa frowned and looked at Chen Feifei as he withdrew his hand. You're not in good health. Rest early. Brother Hao. Chen Feifei went to pull his hand again. She looked up at him with pleading eyes. Do you hate me? Don't think too much. It's nothing. Then why didn't you come back to accompany me? You said that you would take care of me. Feifei. This time, Jean Hausa didn't have a cold expression. In my heart, you're similar to my sister. But, alright, it's getting late. You should rest. Jean Hausa patted her shoulder and turned to leave. After he left, Chen Feifei's expression almost changed. Who wanted to be his sister? Who wanted to be his sister? She had always wanted to be his woman, not his sister. Chen Feifei looked at the bedside lamp at the head of the bed and swept the floor without hesitation. The room was very soundproof and covered with a thick carpet. No matter how loud the noise she made, no one would hear it. Not only did she smash the bedside lamp, but Chen Feifei also threw everything around her that could be smashed and thrown away. It wasn't until she was panting and exhausted that she called the servants to clean up the room. The servants of the Chen family were already used to Chen Feifei's outburst from time to time. They silently packed up the things and put in new ones. In a short period of time, even the carpet had been changed. The room was the same as before Jean Hausa came in. There was no trace of damage. Jean Hausa went downstairs and met Qin Yongchang. When he saw him, he waved. The two of them once again went to the Qin family study room one after the other. Hausa, have you been busy recently? I'm fine. Jean Hausa's voice was indifferent and sounded very calm. You haven't been in the company for a few days, and the company's matters have been pushed back a lot. Look, I'm old now, and my energy can't keep up. In the future, you still have to spend more time on business. Yes. I understand. Speaking of which, I'm almost at the age to retire. Look, how about you take over the Qin Corporation? Jean Hausa lowered his eyes and his face was expressionless. I'm afraid that's not appropriate, right? There's nothing inappropriate about it. After you and Feifei get married, won't the Qin family be yours? Jean Hausa didn't reply, but Qin Yongchang sighed at this moment. Hausa, I also know that you're not willing to marry Feifei. But Feifei is my only daughter. She really likes you. I can't let her suffer. Uncle. I also know that all these years, you've only treated Feifei as your sister. There's no love between a man and a woman. But her health isn't good, and she's been spoiled by me. I won't be at ease handing her over to someone else. After thinking about it, only you are suitable. Seeing that Jean Hausa didn't say anything, the expression on Qin Yongchang's face became more and more pained. Hausa, you can't forget your roots. If our family hadn't taken you in, sent you to school, and given you the best conditions, how could you have achieved what you have today? Don't tell me you're thinking of abandoning Feifei just because you're successful. Uncle, I've said it before. I treat Feifei as my sister. I'll do my best to take care of her. What's more useful than marrying her and accompanying her for the rest of her life? Seeing that Jean Hausa still wanted to speak, he went forward and patted him on the shoulder. All right, you should be tired today. Go and rest. As for the wedding date, I'll get someone to pick a good day. Anyway, you guys already understand and are familiar with each other. If you need time, then get engaged first, then get married. Uncle, alright, I still have work to deal with. You can go back to your room and rest first. Chen Yongchang didn't listen to Zhang Haoze. He waved his hand and sent him away. Zhang Haoze glanced at Chen Yongchang, then finally took a step back and left the study. Before he returned to his room, he saw the family servants coming down from upstairs with 2 large garbage bags. Zhang Haoze stood there until the servant left. Then, he went upstairs again. Shi Mengwan was shocked when she received Xiao Qi's call. Hello. Hello, Mengwan. Xiao Qi's voice sounded very happy. Have you recovered from your cold? Yes. Thank you for your concern. It wasn't a cold, but Shi Mengwan couldn't say that. What's the matter? That's good. I said I wanted to come and see you. No need. Shi Mengwan answered a little quickly. She looked at the time. Zhang Haoze hadn't returned yet, but she had already prepared the food. That's a pity. Xiao Qi thought for a moment. Mengwan, we didn't finish watching the movie that day. Do you have time recently? I might not have time recently. Shi Mengwan bit her lip. My studio has received a new order recently, so I'm a little busy. I see. Xiao Qi nodded. Then can we have a meal together? Xiao Qi, look, you're very busy and don't have time to watch a movie. Then you have to have time to eat, right? Before I came, Auntie told me that you don't know how to take care of yourself. Look, you can't let me disappoint Auntie, can you? Shi Mengwan bit her lip. After thinking about it, she decided to agree. At least she should make things clear to him. Then how about this? Let's meet at noon tomorrow. Okay. Xiao Qi was satisfied. He said a few more words of concern to her and told her to take good care of herself before hanging up. Shi Mengwan sat down and took out her phone to call Zhang Haoze. However, no one picked up after calling for a long time. She looked at the table of dishes, and her good mood seemed to have suddenly disappeared. She had been very happy these past few days. Zhang Haoze had been here with her. During the day, she stayed at home to draw, while Zhang Haoze went to work. At night, they ate together, took a walk, and lingered. Zhang Haoze was much gentler than before. At least, he no longer tormented her for fun. She could also get happiness from that matter. When her body merged with Zhang Haoze's body, she felt satisfied. Not only her body, but also her heart. That was the dear brother she had been longing to find. That was the person she had always liked and loved. Looking at the black screen, Shi Mengwan sent another message to Zhang Haoze. She didn't say anything unnecessary. She just asked him if he would come back for dinner. This time, Zhang Haoze replied. I have something to do today. You eat first. Putting down her phone, Shi Mengwan looked at the dishes on the table and felt a headache. There was also a trace of undetectable disappointment and loneliness. The next day, Shi Mengwan arrived at the place she had agreed to meet Xiao Qi early. She had always been afraid of the cold. Today, she was wearing a thick khaki coat and a scarf of the same color. Her entire body looked much more plump. She thought that she had arrived early, but she didn't expect Xiao Qi to be earlier than her. Sorry, I'm late. Not at all. I arrived early. Xiao Qi got up and pulled a chair for Shi Mengwan. This action made Shi Mengwan a little uncomfortable. She took a step back and looked at Xiao Qi. I'll do it myself. Can't you give me a chance to serve a beauty? This person. Shi Mengwan really didn't know what to say. She didn't decline anymore and sat down. The temperature of the air conditioner in the room was very high. She took off her coat and put it aside. Are all fashion designers as good at dressing as you? Xiaoqi looked at the clothes she was wearing, and there was obvious admiration in his eyes. Shi Mengwan looked at herself and cleared her throat. Thank you. I think so. But I think you're definitely the best at dressing, Xiaoqi whispered. After all, they can't be as beautiful as you. Thank you. Shi Mengwan felt a little uncomfortable from his praise. The waiter happened to bring the menu over at this moment, and Xiaoqi very gracefully let Shi Mengwan order first. After ordering the dishes, Shi Mengwan looked at Xiaoqi and thought about how to speak to him. At this moment, Xiaoqi poured her a cup of hot tea. It's cold outside. Have a cup of tea first. Thank you. To be honest, Xiaoqi was really a very good marriage partner. No matter what, he was very suitable. But this was how the world was. You might not like the suitable one. Xiaoqi. Last time, I was going to introduce my situation, but I didn't finish. I think I'd better tell you about it. Her serious attitude made Xiaoqi also become a little serious. Go ahead. I want to say that we're actually not suitable. Why? What's wrong with me? Xiaoqi asked instinctively. After asking, he realized that he seemed to be too narcissistic. I'm sorry, I just think that I think my qualifications are not bad, so I think you can give it a try. Shi Mengwan shook her head. The problem isn't with you, it's with me. She picked up the cup with both hands and held it in her hand. She felt the slight heat wake her up. I have someone I like. This time, Xiaoqi was stunned. You have someone you like? Yes. Then why did you come on a blind date? He saw that Shi Mengwan didn't look like one of those two-timing women. Because my parents don't know, and even if they did, they might object. I see. She didn't say more, but Xiaoqi seemed to understand. Is it because the person you like can't agree to your family's conditions, so your parents object? Shi Mengwan knew that it wasn't because of that, but since Xiaoqi was certain, she didn't want to explain anymore. Her silence was tacit agreement. Xiaoqi nodded. I understand. The person you like doesn't want to marry into the family, and your parents object? Thinking about it, most men, especially now that many of them were only children, how could they agree to marry into the family? Mengwan, we already know each other. I think, if possible, you should go and do the ideological work for your parents. That would be better. I thank you, but there's no need. Some things aren't as simple as you think. Shi Mengwan hadn't told her family about this at all, nor did she tell Jean Hausa. She wasn't sure if Jean Hausa would agree or not. She wasn't willing to continue, so Xiaoqi didn't ask. The waiter began to serve the dishes, and the two of them ate in silence. When Xiaoqi put down the bowl and chopsticks, he looked at Shi Mengwan. You like that person a lot. I love him. Shi Mengwan also put down her chopsticks. When she answered these three words, her eyes lit up, and her entire face was filled with the light of love. What else did Xiaoqi not understand? Okay. I got it. I won't disturb you again next time. Sorry, it's okay. Xiaoqi was able to let it go. But Mengwan, as your friend, I still want to give you a suggestion. Since you like that man so much, then can that man also sacrifice himself for you? I don't think it's a big deal to marry into the family. Even if the child takes your surname, he will still be his child in the future. This is the truth. Times are different, so there are some things that don't need to be rigidly formal. What do you think? Thank you, I understand. I'm sorry, I was being too talkative. Anyway, I feel that if that man really loves you, he will definitely agree to this condition. Shi Mengwan was silent. After Xiaoqi left, she was still sitting in her seat. If a man really loved her, would he agree to her conditions? But when that person was Jean Hauser, why didn't she have any confidence at all? That night, Jean Hauser didn't come again. She called him and he said that he had something to do. Shi Mengwan hung up the phone and thought about how to bring up this matter the next time she saw Jean Hauser. It wasn't until the third day that Shi Mengwan finally saw Jean Hauser when she returned home. He didn't look any different, but Shi Mengwan could tell from his furrowed brows that he seemed to be a little depressed. Jean Hauser. Chapter 672. Jean Hauser shook his head and reached out to pull her into his arms. Shi Mengwan was hugged by him and she didn't move for a moment. She wanted to look up at him, but the back of her head was held down by him. The faint smell of mint on his body entered her nose. Shi Mengwan noticed that Jean Hauser seemed to be different from before. After a while, he finally let go of her hand. His big hand caressed her cheek and she just looked at him. Have you eaten? No. Shi Mengwan looked in the direction of the kitchen. I'm about to cook. Go. Shi Mengwan glanced at him. She wasn't in a hurry to go to the kitchen. Instead, she looked at him. Are you really okay? Jean Hauser shook his head. Shi Mengwan bit her lip. She knew that Jean Hauser was always like this. When he was still her dear brother, he didn't like to tell her anything. I'll go cook. While eating, Shi Mengwan kept looking at Jean Hauser. She paused when she met his gaze. Jean Hauser. Yes. I don't know much about business. But if you have anything to say, you can tell me. I might not be able to help, but I can listen to you. Jean Hauser was stunned for a moment. He looked at Shi Mengwan and nodded slightly. Okay. He said okay, but he might not really agree. Shi Mengwan knew. She didn't ask anymore. Just when she thought Jean Hauser wouldn't speak, Jean Hauser spoke. I have to go out tomorrow. Shi Mengwan didn't expect him to take the initiative to tell her about his whereabouts. Her hand holding the chopsticks stopped there and she stared at him blankly. I might be gone for more than half a month. That long? Shi Mengwan bit her lip. Her words were unconsciously tainted with disappointment. Jean Hauser didn't say anything and just continued eating. Shi Mengwan knew his personality. He couldn't say anything nice, but she still hoped to see Jean Hauser's reluctance to part with her. However, he appeared so calm. Shi Mengwan didn't wait for Jean Hauser to say that he was reluctant to part with her. However, at night, it was as if he had returned to the beginning of their relationship. He took with all his might and plundered with all his might. In the end, Shi Mengwan felt that her waist was about to break, but Jean Hauser didn't stop until she was exhausted and fell into a deep sleep. When Shi Mengwan woke up in the morning, Jean Hauser was already gone. Looking at the empty house, she could not help but feel a sense of loss in her heart. He picked up his phone to check the time. When he opened the web page, he saw 2 words. Wait for me. There were no more words, only these 2 words. Shi Mengwan's disappointment suddenly disappeared. Of course she would wait for him. She had waited for so long. He didn't mind waiting for another half a month. No one knew where he was going or what he was going to do. Half a month. Come to think of it, that was really a long time. Shi Mengwan's dilemma didn't last long. She received a call from Su Qingsang. Su Qingsang and Hu Jinyao had decided to return to Rome City together. Not only did they want to go back, but they also wanted to bring Xiang Kaiping back with them. The melancholy of parting made Shi Mengwan recover from the disappointment she felt just now. Shi Mengwan and Su Qingsang were high school classmates and deskmates. Ever since the two of them met, they had gotten along very well in the past few years because they were very compatible. Even though the two of them later chose completely different majors, their relationship had always been very good. The medical university was also very close to her Z University. Although going to Rome City was still in the country, it couldn't be compared to Lin City. On the 13th of the year, Su Qingsang and Hu Jinyao were at the airport, preparing to fly to Rome City. Shi Mengwan was reluctant to leave. She went to the airport early and talked to Su Qingsang for a long time. Su Qingsang was also reluctant to leave her, and she didn't look very happy. She seemed to have something on her mind. Shi Mengwan didn't think too much about it, thinking that she was reluctant to leave Lin City. In fact, she was also reluctant to leave. She didn't sleep well last night, and there were dark circles under her eyes. When Su Qingsang noticed it, she could only remind her again not to focus on drawing next time and ignore her health. Shi Mengwan knew that she really cared about her and was touched. After sending Su Qingsang away, Shi Mengwan thought for a while and put her energy back into work. Since she planned to participate in the competition in France, she had to put some effort into it. On the day of the Lantern Festival, Shi Mengwan thought of Jean Hauser again. She still remembered that year when the two of them ate lantern dumplings together, and she also remembered that he bought the wine-fermented meatballs as lantern dumplings. Not wanting her emotions to be trapped in her thoughts of Jean Hauser, Shi Mengwan went home. Mother Shi made the lantern dumplings and waited for her. When she ate the lantern dumplings, she took a photo and posted it on her WeChat moments. Then, she sent the photo to Jean Hauser alone. The lantern dumplings are very sweet. I miss you very much. She never received a reply from Jean Hauser. At first, Shi Mengwan kept looking at her phone, but later, she simply put it down. She focused on accompanying her parents and sister. At the same time, in Qing City, Jean Hauser was sitting in the car, and beside him was his assistant, Tang Hua. President Jean. Tang Hua placed a document in Jean Hauser's hand. I've already checked. The old man isn't feeling well and has already been hospitalized. He was sent in yesterday. It's the festival today. The old man dislikes those people for being noisy and chased them away. Jean Hauser casually flipped through the information in front of him under the lights in the car. Are you sure there's no one? There are bodyguards guarding the door and doctors on duty. Let's go. Jean Hauser placed the document back in Tang Hua's hand. Let's go meet the old man. Boss. Tang Hua even called him by his old name. Isn't it too early? I heard from the doctor that he has already passed the critical stage. It seems that the old man can still live for a long time. We don't have to be in a hurry. No. Jean Hauser stared at the entrance of the hospital with a sinister gaze. I don't want to wait anymore. In the VIP ward of the hospital, the entire floor was very quiet. The weather in Qing City had been pretty good these few days. The full moon hung high in the sky outside. In the ward, an old man who looked to be in his 70s was sleeping on the hospital bed with his eyes tightly closed. The sudden sound in the room made him open his eyes. The environment he had been in for decades made him instantly alert. His hand reached under the pillow. If I were you, I wouldn't act rashly now. The man deliberately lowered his voice, but it sounded very clear. The old man's hand paused. The lights in the ward were turned on at this moment, and he narrowed his eyes. After adapting to the light, he looked at Jean Hauser in front of him. It's you. It seems that the old man knows me. Then I don't need to introduce myself. Jean Hauser walked to the sofa opposite the bed and sat down. He folded his legs elegantly, and he looked relaxed and leisurely. The old man stared at him for a long time and nodded gently. I didn't expect you to come back after so many years. Yes. I've disappointed you that I didn't die outside. Jean Hauser met the old man's sharp gaze and didn't dodge at all. The corners of his lips curled up with a hint of mockery. The old man coughed a few times, and his face was redder than before. You came back to take revenge. The old man narrowed his eyes. His old and shrewd eyes didn't miss any of Jean Hauser's expressions. The corners of Jean Hauser's lips curled up slightly. He leaned back against the back of the sofa. Shouldn't I? The old man was silent and stared at Jean Hauser. What do you want to do? You should ask me what I did. The old man glared at Jean Hauser, and a hint of wariness suddenly appeared in his eyes. What did you do? Jean Hauser didn't answer the old man's question. He got up and walked to the end of the bed. He pulled out the medical record and glanced at it. I think it's better for you not to know now. Putting the medical record back, Jean Hauser's expression was indifferent. Otherwise, I'm afraid that if you know, your condition will worsen and you die of anger. That would be my sin. Don't you think so? Grandpa, the old man covered his chest because of his words. His other hand pointed at Jean Hauser, and his face was livid. Jean Hauser looked at him without any fluctuation. He looked at this old man who could be considered to be in his twilight years, Jean Cohen. Jean Cohen had difficulty breathing. He reached out his hand to get the medicine. The moment he got the medicine bottle, Jean Hauser gently pinched the bottle in his hand. He flipped the bottle over and raised it a little higher. Grandpa, why are you angry? You are the pillar of the Jean family now. If you were to fall, the Jean family would be in a mess. Jean Cohen's expression became even uglier. He looked at Jean Hauser as if he was looking at an Azura from hell. He raised his hand, but he didn't manage to grab the medicine. He could only reach out and want to ring the bell for help. Jean Hauser looked at his movements and saw that his trembling fingers were about to touch the bell. However, he grabbed Jean Cohen's hand the moment he was about to touch it. Jean Cohen panted even more violently. Jean Hauser expressionlessly pressed his body back onto the bed. Before he could react, he poured out a pill from the bottle and put it into his mouth. After feeding him the medicine, he seemed to have been stained with something dirty. He took out a handkerchief from his pocket and wiped his hands clean. After taking the medicine, Jean Cohen's breathing finally stopped. However, his expression couldn't recover for a while. Seeing Jean Hauser's actions, his face turned from white to red again. His swollen face, which had almost turned purple, looked a little terrifying under the light. You, Jean Cohen pointed at Jean Hauser and spent a lot of effort to finish his sentence. What exactly do you want to do? Jean Hauser looked at the expression on Jean Cohen's face and suddenly smiled. He rarely smiled, and his smile at this moment undoubtedly carried deep malice. He threw the handkerchief to the side, bent down, and looked at Jean Cohen. He looked at his old and turbid eyes, and said word by word extremely slowly. I'm here to get back what I deserve. Jean Cohen glared at him, and his hands trembled even more. Jean Hauser didn't want to let it go just like that. He moved forward a little, and his voice was even softer than before. After you get it, destroy it. Jean Cohen was completely out of breath this time. His eyes widened, and his breath was stuck there, almost suffocating. The corners of Jean Hauser's lips curled into a mocking smile. Before the other party completely fainted, he pressed the bell. He stood up straight and looked at Jean Cohen's powerless hand. He left the ward without looking back. When he left, he bumped into the doctors who had rushed over. The doctors were very concerned about the people in this special ward. When they saw Jean Hauser suddenly appear, they didn't understand where this person came from. Jean Hausa acted as if he didn't see them and walked straight out. The bodyguard who had been staying inside just now had already come back to his senses. He reached out to stop Jean Hausa. Jean Hausa glanced at the two people coldly. The aura of the two bodyguards was actually taken away by him, and they took a step back at the same time. After coming out of the hospital, Tang Hua was already waiting outside. When he saw Jean Hausa come out, he was the first to open the car door for him. When Jean Hausa got into the car, he also got into the car. "Boss? Don't worry, I won't die." Jean Hausa looked at the impatient building outside the car window. His eyes were a little cold. He reached out and took out the document from just now to look at it. "Old fox. Boss?" Tang Hua looked at him. "Are we going back to the hotel next?" Jean Hausa was about to nod when his phone rang. He opened it and saw a message. On it was a bowl of glutinous rice balls. Looking at the photo and the words, the corners of Jean Hausa's lips unconsciously curled up a little. His finger swiped across the screen and was about to reply. Bang! Their car was hit by someone from behind. Jean Hausa's phone flew out and fell into the car. He turned around abruptly, and Tang Hua turned around with him. The two of them saw that under the night sky, 3 cars were following behind them. They had already surrounded their car. "Boss?" Tang Hua looked at Jean Hausa worriedly. Jean Hausa narrowed his eyes. "Speed up." The driver heard his words and stepped on the accelerator. They accelerated, and the car behind them also accelerated. At this moment, the car on the right was once again heading in their direction and slamming hard into them. With a bang, the car that Jean Hausa and the others were sitting in was knocked to the side, and then it slammed heavily into the side guardrail. The car collided extremely violently, but the 3 cars behind it didn't intend to let it go just like that. The car behind them followed suit and crashed into them. There was another pang sound. This time, it was even louder than the previous 2 times. Shi Mengwan waited until midnight, but she didn't receive a reply from Jean Hausa. Her mood dropped again. She ate lantern dumplings with her parents, admired the moon, and chatted with her sister. When she returned to her room, she couldn't fall asleep. She tossed and turned on the bed, feeling conflicted. She couldn't help but take out her phone to take a look. There was still no reply from Jean Hausa. She bit her lip and couldn't help but feel a little lonely. She didn't know who said that it wasn't because she was lonely that she missed him, but because she missed him that she was lonely. In the past, she thought that these words were pretentious, but now she realized that it was true. It wasn't pretentious. She couldn't help but want to call Jean Hausa, but she was worried that Jean Hausa really had something to do. After thinking about it, she could only continue sending messages. "Good night." After sending these 2 words, Shi Mengwan waited for a while, but before she could receive a reply from Jean Hausa, she fell asleep in a depressed and conflicted mood. "Dear brother." Shi Mengwan looked at Qiao Zhe with an obvious smile in her eyes. "Are you serious?" Today, the young man came home and told her that he had helped her solve the problem of going to school, so she could continue going to school. This news made her exceptionally happy. "Yes." The young man nodded. Looking at the news he brought, Shi Mengwan's eyes lit up. She felt that this decision was right. "That's really great." Shi Mengwan couldn't help but reach out and hug Qiao Zhe. "Dear brother, how did you do it?" Qiao Zhe was caught off guard by her and felt a little uncomfortable. His hand hung there and didn't move for a long time. After Shi Mengwan finished hugging him, she realized that she was a little too excited. She took a step back and looked at the young man, feeling a little embarrassed. Dear brother, when can I go to school?" "You can go tomorrow." Xiao Zhe looked at Shi Mengwan. It's the nearby 5th high school. They have already agreed to accept you. You can go and register tomorrow. Then you can go to school. Really? Shi Mengwan was very happy. That's really great. After being happy, she looked at the young man with concern. Then, dear brother, what about you? Me? What about me? I'm going to school. What about you? I won't go. It's the same for you. Dear brother. Shi Mengwan looked at the young man. Even if she didn't understand the key point, she could understand that with Xiao Zhe's current ability, he must have done something for her to be able to go to school without a Lin City hukou. She didn't understand what he had done. To her, everything about the young man was like a mystery. He could always solve all the problems in the shortest time. Dear brother, if you don't go to school, then I won't go either. What nonsense are you talking about? The young man glared at her. Didn't you want to be a designer? Why? You don't want to anymore. Shi Mengwan bit her lip and looked at the young man. She kept shaking her head. No, I want to be, but I want to go to school with you. All right, you don't have to worry about my matters. The young man looked at her with a strong expression that couldn't be refused. Don't worry about me for now. I've asked the teacher. She said that you haven't been to school for the past 6 months and might not be able to keep up. Before school starts, you have to buy a semester's worth of books to read first. Dear brother, let's go. I'll take you to buy books. Shi Mengwan couldn't win against Xiao Zhe, so she could only compromise. She didn't quite understand why the young man didn't go to school himself. She vaguely knew why, but at that time, she was still young, so she couldn't understand the answer. Shi Mengwan waited for a few days, but Zhang Haozi didn't appear. Another half a month passed, and it was already the first month of the lunar calendar. In the middle of the second month of the lunar calendar, the temperature in Lin City began to rise. At first, Shi Mengwan would try to call Zhang Haozi, but after she realized that she couldn't get through to his phone, she stopped calling him. Every day before she went to bed, she would call Zhang Haozi. If she couldn't get through, she would send another message. If no one replied, she would go back to sleep. At the same time as the weather warmed up, Shi Mengwan's work also passed the preliminary round of the French fashion design competition. The other party sent an invitation letter and asked Shi Mengwan to prepare to go to France to participate in the rest of the competition. This good news more or less made Shi Mengwan feel a little better. But it only lasted for less than half a day. Chapter 673. Shi Mengwan was wearing the new clothes Xiao Zhe had bought for her and carrying the new school bag Xiao Zhe had bought for her. The book inside was also bought by Xiao Zhe. The school bag was very heavy, not only for this semester, but also for the previous semester. Fortunately, Shi Mengwan's grades had always been good. Although she didn't study last semester, she believed that she would work hard to catch up. She was thinking about why the teacher called her today and didn't give her any homework. Instead, he asked her to read through the books that she had read before. If there was anything she didn't understand, she could look for her teacher. She was in a good mood and quickened her pace. After living in this bungalow for more than half a year, she was no longer as careless as when she first came here. Turn right, turn left. Just 3 more alleys and they would reach home. But before he got there, he heard the sounds of fighting. This area was really chaotic. Shi Mengwan couldn't help but quicken her steps. She wanted to avoid it, but she heard a familiar voice. What? Haven't you learned your lesson from last time? The youth's voice had already passed the stage of puberty. His voice had already begun to become clear and bright, and it was the voice she heard every day. She widened her eyes and couldn't help but stop in her tracks. She quietly walked over and hid behind the corner of the wall. She silently poked her head out. Beside the young man stood a few boys that she did not recognize. They were all about the same age as him. There were a few people lying on the ground. The leader's face was covered in blood, and the young man's foot was stepping on the man's chest. What if you haven't learned it? I'll say it again. This place, as well as the East Pier, are all my territory. The next time you cross the border, I won't be polite anymore. The young man was already more than 1.8 meters tall, and he was thin. Most of the time, although he was quiet in front of her, he was gentle. Shi Mengwan had never seen this youth before. Her heart was beating a little fast. The person he was stepping on wanted to get up. Stinking brat, I'm telling you, don't be arrogant. Brother Liang won't let you off. Ha! The youth laughed. It was a very arrogant laugh. He began to exert force on his leg. Brother Liang won't let me off, right? Then let him try. Not to mention Brother Liang, even if he had the ability to call Big Boss Wei over, I wouldn't be afraid of him. Understand? As he spoke, his foot was pressed against the man's chin. That person's neck was stepped on, and his face was filled with pain. His face, which had already been beaten into a pig's head, looked even scarier now. The man started to lose his breath, but the young man had no intention of letting go. Not only did he not, but he also stepped even harder. The man's eyeballs were about to pop out of their sockets, and he was about to stop breathing. Shi Mengwan was shocked and couldn't help but gasp. That voice was very soft, but it moved Xiao Zhe. The young man's gaze shifted over. Shi Mengwan quickly retracted her body, but she was still a step too late and was seen by the youth. The young man's expression was rather ugly. He retracted his leg, caught his breath, and coughed violently. He turned to look at the few people following him and gave them a look. Those people began to deal with the aftermath. The people lying on the ground were quickly dragged away by them. The young man's expression was solemn as he clenched his fists at his sides. He was only stunned for a few seconds before he reacted. His slender legs walked step by step in Shi Mengwan's direction. Shi Mengwan's body was trembling. In the past half a year that she had been with the young man, other than occasionally coming back with some injuries, the young man had rarely been injured in the past few days. She knew that he would fight outside, but she had never seen the young man treat others like this. It turned out that the young man wasn't uninjured. Instead, had he changed from a victim to a perpetrator? Shi Mengwan didn't dare to think about it. Her body was trembling. She didn't know what she was afraid of. However, the ruthlessness on the young man's face just now really scared her. A pair of long legs suddenly appeared in front of her eyes. She looked up along the legs and saw the young man's expressionless face. Her body actually went limp and she sat on the ground just like that. The young man wasn't in a hurry to reach out to help her up. He was already 16 years old. He was tall and thin, and one could already see the shadow of an adult on his body. He stared at her face from above, his lips opening and closing. You saw it. Shi Mengwan instinctively wanted to shake her head, but her body was cold and she couldn't say a word. However, there was a hint of fear in her eyes as she looked at him. The young man looked at her and reached out his hand to her. Shi Mengwan's body trembled. Thinking about the scene just now, she instinctively retreated, wanting to avoid the young man's hand. Xiao Zhe narrowed his eyes, and there was a hint of danger in them. He had asked someone to think of a way to get Shi Mengwan a place to go to school because he didn't want her to stay at home every day, and he didn't want her to see him like this today. However, he didn't expect her to still see it. Looking at Shi Mengwan's avoiding gaze, he forcefully reached out his hand and took away Shi Mengwan's school bag. He carried it on his shoulder. Before she could react to what he was going to do, he bent down and picked her up. Shi Mingwan's body trembled even more, but she was familiar with the young man's embrace. She looked at the young man's handsome side profile and swallowed her saliva. The young man didn't seem to notice that something was wrong with her. He just carried her back to the bungalow where they were. After Shi Mengwan entered the door, her legs were still a little weak. The young man placed her on the sofa. Almost as soon as she was put down by him, she shrunk to the other side of the sofa. The young man suddenly moved his face closer. His big hand supported her side as he stared at her face. "Are you afraid of me?" Shi Mengwan looked at the young man's familiar face. These days, they slept together every night. Sometimes, when she was cold, she would wake up to find herself in the young man's arms. The environment of the bungalow was bad, but she had never been cold. She had never been hungry. She suddenly shook her head. Her movements were very gentle but firm. Before the young man could take his hand away, Shi Mengwan bit her lip and said timidly, Did you want to kill him just now?" He didn't expect her to ask such a question. The young man was stunned for a moment, then he shook his head. "No." Shi Mengwan seemed to be relieved. "You don't kill anyone, okay?" The young man looked into her eyes and caressed her face with his slender and well-defined hands. "Okay. I won't kill anyone." Shi Mengwan heaved a sigh of relief. The young man's hands were a little cold. The weather hadn't turned warm in this season. She looked at him with a hint of anticipation in her eyes. "Killing is against the law." She said this in a very low voice. The young man seemed to want to laugh, but he held it in. "Yes. Killing is against the law. Wanwan really knows a lot." He was treating her like a child. Shi Mengwan gritted her teeth and suddenly raised her voice. "Don't care. If you kill someone, you'll go to prison. I won't go to see you when the time comes." She said it resolutely, but the expression in her eyes was completely different. The young man looked at her duplicitous look and raised his eyebrows. "Oh. If I go to prison, you won't come to see me?" "Of course." Shi Mengwan nodded and emphasized, "If you go to prison, I'll go home and let you be alone in the future." Her face was young and childish. The young man suddenly reached out and hugged her in his arms. "Okay, I'll listen to you." His embrace made Shi Mengwan relax. She wasn't as afraid as before, and she was no longer trembling. "Dear brother. Don't do anything dangerous, okay?" The young man didn't answer her question. He just tightened his arms. Shi Mengwan had a little difficulty breathing, but she still had to say, "If you do something dangerous, what will I do?" She reached out to push him away and moved away from his arms a little. "Dear brother, if you're really locked up, or if something else happens, what will I do?" After such a long time, she had run away from home. But she had never felt lonely because of him. His care and love for her made her forget the loneliness of being alone. More importantly, she realized that her dear brother was different in her heart. "Dear brother, I don't want anything to happen to you, and I don't want to be separated from you, so you have to take care of yourself, okay?" The young man looked into her eyes. Her lips opened and closed as she said words that she was worried about him. Today, she saw his dark side, but she wasn't afraid, nor did she run away. He couldn't tell what he felt in his heart. Something was surging in his heart. He hugged her tightly again and buried his face in the crook of her neck. His voice was very soft as he smelled the faint fragrance of a young girl on her body. "Okay, I promise you. I'll take care of myself and won't be separated from you." "Really? Really?" Shi Mengwan raised her head and looked into the young man's eyes. Her heart had already calmed down. She bit her lip. Dear brother, we'll always be together, right? Yes. The young man nodded and looked into Shi Mingwan's eyes with a focused expression. We'll always be together. He would be with her, protect her, and not let anyone hurt her. Dear brother. Shi Mingwan reached out and hugged the young man's waist. No matter how her dear brother treated others, as long as they could be like this forever, it would be fine. She hugged him very tightly until she saw the trace of blood on the young man's sleeve. She was shocked and forced herself not to look and not to care. She stepped back. She gestured for him to take a shower. She washed his clothes for him, so the blood stain was naturally washed away. However, even though Shi Mingwan could wash away the blood stain, it didn't mean that she could forget the young man's ruthless expression. That night, she inevitably had nightmares. She dreamed that the young man was holding a knife in his hand and was constantly slashing at a person whose face couldn't be seen clearly. She screamed with all her might, trying to make the young man stop. When the young man saw her coming, he finally stopped. The young man walked towards her and told her not to be afraid. Shi Mingwan kept shaking her head. Looking at the police who rushed over, she wanted to tell the young man to leave quickly, but she couldn't say anything. She could only watch helplessly as the police took the young man away. No matter how much she cried, it was useless. At this moment, the scene in the dream changed. The young man's face became Jeanhauser. When she saw Jeanhauser again, it was through the iron window. Shi Mingwan was frightened. She wanted to pull his hand, but his figure was getting further and further away. She woke up from her dream screaming, "Dear brother, dear brother." The scene in the dream began to enlarge, and that feeling made her fall into deep despair. She opened her eyes and was shocked by the figure at the head of the bed. When she saw clearly, she realized that the person sitting there was Jeanhauser. Jeanhauser. She wasn't fully awake yet, nor had she recovered from the dream. She suddenly saw him, and she still felt like she was in a dream. Yes. In the next second, Shi Mingwan suddenly sat up and wrapped her arms around Jeanhauser's neck. She hugged him tightly. Dear brother, dear brother. When she thought of the figure in the iron window in her dream, she felt a strong sense of insecurity. She hugged him very tightly and pressed her face against his chest, listening to his heartbeat. Jeanhauser let her hug him and didn't move. Shi Mingwan suddenly raised her head and kissed his lips. Her kiss was a little urgent and a little flustered. She was also a little scared. She didn't know what her dear brother had experienced all these years. What made him, a street thug, suddenly become a business elite? She also didn't know how he started the company and what hardships he had experienced. But she thought that he should be safe now, right? It shouldn't be like what she thought in her dream, right? She couldn't help but think of the last time they met. He seemed to be fighting with someone again. That made the feeling of insecurity even more obvious. Dear brother. She kissed his lips haphazardly. All her experience came from him. In this aspect, she was undoubtedly clumsy. But this clumsiness made Jeanhauser lose control. Her hands tugged at his clothes. She was a little anxious. She was so anxious that she couldn't unbuckle her belt even after trying a few times. Her face was red, but at this moment, Jeanhauser turned the tables and pressed her down on the bed. It was a dark night, and the weather outside was a little gloomy. Spring had arrived, and there was a lot of rain. It was accompanied by the occasional sound of spring thunder. Soon, it started to rain outside. The sound of the thunderstorm covered up the sound of the collision in the room. Those emotions that were out of control also existed on such a thunderstorm night. When Shi Mingwan woke up in the morning, she thought she had a dream. She dreamed that Jeanhauser had returned and that he was fine. She dreamed that they were the same as before. She enjoyed the pleasure of being intimate. She opened her eyes, and the feeling of exhaustion and weakness in her body suddenly woke her up. It wasn't a dream. Was Jean Hauser really back? She sat up abruptly, ignoring the marks on her body and the discomfort on her body. There was no one in the room. She casually put on her clothes and went outside. Jean Hauser had just closed the door. On the dining table beside him was breakfast that had just been delivered. "You're awake." Shi Mengwan blinked her eyes. Only then did she confirm that she was really not dreaming. She went forward and hugged Jean Hauser again. She rubbed her face against his chest and smelled the mint scent on his body. Her heart slowly relaxed and she finally wasn't so nervous anymore. She looked up at him and realized that he seemed to have lost a little weight. She didn't take a closer look last night, but now that it was daytime, she took a closer look and realized that Jean Hauser had lost a lot of weight. Not only had he lost weight, but he also looked a little haggard. She had many questions to ask, but in the end, she could only hug him again. Thinking of his appearance, she sniffed and her eyes inexplicably felt a little hot. Jean Hauser let her hug him without moving. After a while, he patted her back. "Let's eat." Shi Mengwan nodded and walked to the dining table to sit down. Today wasn't the weekend, and she still had to go to work. She looked up at Jean Hauser. "You're back from your business trip. Can you rest for the next few days?" "Yes." Shi Mengwan nodded and looked at him again. "Will you come back for dinner tonight?" Jean Hauser looked at her. He still had a lot of things to do. He had to leave again after a few days, but, okay. She wanted to refuse, but the words that came out of her mouth became affirmative. Shi Mengwan smiled and seemed to be relieved. After dinner, Shi Mengwan went to the company. She had spent a few days to draw the work that she was going to compete in. She had named it Blue Mystery. To her, Jean Hauser was that mystery. But she wasn't in a hurry. She had the patience to slowly solve this mystery. Jean Hauser got into the car, and Tang Hua looked at him worriedly. "Boss, are you okay?" Jean Hauser shook his head. The car accident had caused Jean Hauser to suffer some minor injuries. However, he refused to rest for long. Instead, after he finished his matters in Qing City, he came here. He roughly knew that the person upstairs was his boss's favorite. "But, boss, I'm afraid we'll have a lot of things to do in the future. Moreover, the situation is getting more and more chaotic. It's not appropriate for you to be like this now." Tang Hua had followed Jean Hauser for a long time. In the past 10 years, what hadn't they experienced? But in the past, those undercurrents were still calm on the surface, but now it was different. Jean Hauser's appearance in Qing City was equivalent to turning everything over to the surface. Although that car accident didn't cause much damage, it was definitely a warning. Jean Kun wasn't dead yet, and those people below weren't honest. Not to mention that there were countless people who didn't like Jean Hauser and wanted to get rid of him. "Boss, why don't you stay away from Miss Shi for now?" With their current abilities, even if they could protect Shi Mengwan, it wouldn't be good for such a big weakness to be known by others. Jean Hauser leaned against the back of the chair with his eyes half closed. His face was gloomy, and no one knew what he was thinking. He didn't say anything, so Tang Hua couldn't say much. The car drove towards the Qin Corporation's building. Just as they were about to reach the Qin Corporation's building, Jean Hauser finally spoke. "From tomorrow onwards, I'll move back to the Qin family." "Boss? You've been living in the Qin family all this time. Do you think those people don't know?" The problem now wasn't where he lived, but he didn't finish his sentence, but Jean Hauser understood what he meant. His face was gloomy, and his expression looked quite solemn. "Boss? Just listen to me." Tang Hua had told him long ago, but John Hause had always refused. Was he still hesitating at this time? Stop talking. Boss, what will happen if you get engaged to Miss Chin? It's not like you're getting married. This period of time is just right to divert their attention. It's good for you and sister-in-law, sure. John Hause pursed his lips into a straight line, and his gaze kept looking out of the window. Seeing this, Tang Hua called out again. Chapter 674. There was silence in the car. John Hause did not respond to Tang Hua's words. He knew that Tang Hua was right. At this stage, it was best and most suitable for him to get engaged to Qin Feifei. Putting aside the fact that it could divert the attention of that group of people, the Qin family had some influence in Xi province. Qin Feifei's maternal family also had a certain background. Although Qin Yongchang was a despicable person, he truly loved his daughter. Qin Feifei wasn't sure Mengwan. Moreover, it was just an engagement. It wouldn't affect anything. If he was rational, he would have agreed. Lowering his eyes, he rubbed his temples. Let's not talk about this anymore. Let's solve the problem in front of us first. Boss. Tang Hua felt that it was a pity. This was a really good opportunity. All right. John Hause was not only thinking about the matter in front of him, but also other things. Tell old 6 and old 7 to hurry up. He was really impatient from waiting. Understood. Tang Hua looked at John House's expression and felt a little uncomfortable. Boss, don't worry. It's all temporary. When our troubles are resolved, you can be with sister-in-law. It was just that the troubles in front of them were not easy to solve. He knew, and so did John Hause. The carriage fell into silence. After a long time, John Hause turned his face and looked out of the window. They had already arrived at the Qin Corporation building. Thinking of Qin Yongchang, that old fox, his face darkened. During this period of time, Qin Yongchang's movements are also very big. Be on guard. I know. Tang Hua thought of Qin Yongchang, and there was a hint of disdain on his lips. However, when the car stopped, all traces of those emotions disappeared. John Hause hadn't been in Lin City for a while, so there was a pile of work that he hadn't finished dealing with. For the whole morning, he was basically dealing with all kinds of official matters. Apart from the Qin Corporation's business, he was also responsible for several companies under his name. When it was almost lunchtime, Qin Feifei arrived. Brother Hao. Qin Feifei looked at John Hause and felt very wronged. Where have you been all this time? Why aren't you back yet? I went on a business trip. John House's voice was very soft. Qin Feifei found that it was very rare for John Hause to not smile at her for a long time, but his attitude today could be considered gentle. She was happy in her heart, and the pout on her face lessened a little. Brother Hao, do you know how much I miss you? You're always busy when I call you, and you don't reply to my messages. I almost thought something happened to you. Didn't I tell you? I'm on a business trip. John Hause looked at her. What's the matter? Can't I look for you if I have nothing to do? Qin Feifei stood in front of him. Brother Hao, you haven't eaten with me for a long time. No matter what, you have to eat with me today. I still have work here. Work, work, all you know is work. Qin Feifei pouted her lips. Work will never be finished. I want you to accompany me. She looked at the time and stepped forward to hold John House's hand. Let's go. It's almost time for dinner. You still have time to eat, right? Feifei, let's go. Qin Feifei pulled John Hause up. John Hause originally wanted to pull her hand away, but he didn't know what he thought of, but he let her pull him up and go outside. When he passed by the assistant's office, he happened to see Tang Hua. When Tang Hua saw his actions, he obviously heaved a sigh of relief. President Jean. Yes. Jean Hauser nodded. I'm going out to eat with Fei Fei. You keep an eye on the company. Yes. Tang Hua nodded and gave Jean Hauser a look. President Jean, be careful on the road. I'm afraid there will be a traffic jam at this time. I know. Chen Feifei looked at Tang Hua and then at Jean Hauser. There will be a traffic jam at this time. It can't be, right? Let's go. Jean Hauser brought Tang Hua downstairs. They went downstairs and got into the car. As expected, they saw a few tails behind them. Jean Hauser narrowed his eyes. He didn't move. When Chen Feifei's face approached his arm, he didn't push her away. When they arrived at the restaurant, it was Chen Feifei's favorite restaurant. After entering the door, Jean Hauser looked behind him from the corner of his eye. The car that was following them had already stopped on the opposite side of the road. There was a trace of mockery in Jean Hauser's eyes. Brother Hao. What do you want to eat? Anything is fine. Jean Hauser turned to look at Chen Feifei. It was rare that he didn't give her a cold face like before. Shi Mengwan went to the studio today. After a while, she would go to France to participate in the fashion design competition. Before that, she had to arrange the content of the studio. However, today, she was obviously a little absent-minded. She was thinking about what to eat tonight. She hadn't seen Jean Hauser for so long. Should she make it more grand today? With this thought in mind, Shi Mengwan couldn't help but turn on her phone. Here, she downloaded an app that specialized in teaching people how to cook. Looking at the menu inside, Shi Mengwan left the company early to buy ingredients. When she got home, she started preparing dinner. She sent a message to Jean Hauser, asking him to remember to come back for dinner. When Jean Hauser received his message, he had just driven out of the Qin Corporation's building. In the Qin Corporation's building, Jean Hauser had already gotten into the car. He was about to head in the direction of Shi Mengwan's house when he saw the people who had helped him shake off at noon following him again. Jean Hauser's face darkened. Thinking about his apartment near the company, he turned the car around and drove in the direction of the apartment. During the rush hour, the traffic was very heavy. It wasn't easy for him to shake off those 3 cars. The car drove to the apartment. Because this was a high-end residential area, cars outside couldn't enter, so Jean Hauser didn't have to worry about those people following him. After entering the underground parking lot, he went upstairs and changed his clothes. He disguised himself before going downstairs again. He changed his car and left from another exit. As expected, there were people guarding the other exit. He drove the car on the road, but the car behind him didn't move. When Jean Hauser arrived at Shi Mengwan's apartment, she had already waited for him for nearly 2 hours. Seeing Jean Hauser enter the door, Shi Mengwan's worry was half relieved, but she couldn't help but ask. You've been at work until now? Yes. Jean Hauser replied, but Shi Mengwan suddenly realized that something was wrong. Other than in bed, every time she saw Jean Hauser, he was wearing a suit and shirt. Today, he was wearing a casual jacket. You didn't wear this to work this morning? Yes. Jean Hauser nodded. I accidentally poured coffee on my clothes at the company, so I changed. In fact, he had put on a beard and a hat just now, but he had removed those disguises before coming up. Shi Mengwan felt that it was a little strange, but she couldn't tell what was strange. After thinking about it, she pulled Jean Hauser's hand. Wait a moment. Dinner will be ready soon. Shi Mengwan gestured for him to wait for a while as she spoke, then she went to the kitchen. Her footsteps were a little fast. Jean Hauser didn't quite understand why she was in such a hurry until he saw the dining table. There was a candlestick on the white modern dining table. Beside the candlestick was a bouquet of white roses in an exquisite vase. It looked very festive. The tablecloths and cutlery had been laid out on both sides. From everything, it could be seen that Shi Mengwan had carefully arranged today's dinner. He still remembered the clothes she was wearing. A red, close-fitting dress. Jean Hauser couldn't help but get up and walk towards the kitchen. Shi Mengwan had just taken out the ingredients to process. When she saw him come in, her face was a little red. You go out. I'll be ready soon. With him here, she would be too embarrassed to show off. Jean Hauser stood at the door and didn't move. He just stared at his face. Shi Mengwan felt more and more uncomfortable under his gaze. She reached out to push him. Go out. Hurry up, go out. Jean Hauser pulled her hand over, lowered his head, and kissed her lips hard. He didn't go deeper and stopped after a brief kiss. I'll wait for you. He finally left the kitchen. Shi Mengwan's face was a little red and a little hot. She patted her face to let her breathing and heartbeat return to normal. She turned around, looked at the ingredients on the cooking table, and began to work. She had tried frying steak before, but the taste was really only average. She only hoped that Jean Hauser wouldn't mind. Half an hour later, Shi Mengwan brought out the fried steak, the pasta she had made, and a salad. It's ready to eat. She set everything up and looked at Jean Hauser, but he suddenly grabbed her hand. I think you've also prepared wine. Wine? Shi Mengwan's pretty face turned red. She had really prepared it. But when he said it directly, it gave her a feeling that he couldn't wait. She turned around shyly and took out the bottle of red wine from the wine cabinet. It's not a particularly expensive wine. She didn't know much about wine, so she just picked a relatively expensive bottle to buy. It's okay. Jean Hauser stood up and watched her prepare all of this. He resisted the urge to go forward and hug her. Instead, he opened the wine and poured it for her and himself. Shi Mengwan sat down opposite him. The dining table wasn't big. She picked up her glass and clinked glasses with him. Jean Hauser took the glass from her hand and stared at her face with a burning gaze. What's wrong? Shi Mengwan felt uncomfortable under his gaze. Is there something on my face? No. Jean Hauser shook his head and gently clinked glasses with her. I just have something to tell you. What? What was it that made her so serious? From tomorrow onwards, our company has a lot of things to do. I might not be able to come here every day. He was able to leave his home and come here successfully today because those people hadn't reacted yet. Once they reacted, it wouldn't be so simple. You can't come here every day. Shi Mengwan bit her lip, as if she was thinking about the meaning behind his words. Then, how long will it take? Jean Hauser didn't say anything. He wasn't willing to give her a promise. It'll take some time. Shi Mengwan lowered her head and took a sip of wine. She didn't know much about wine, but now she felt that this wine was a little bitter. Yes, did you encounter any problems? Jean Hauser looked at her and shook his head gently. It's just ordinary work. I'll be fine after I'm done with this. Oh. Shi Mengwan didn't know what else to say. Let's eat. The meal was very quiet. Shi Mengwan even forgot to light the candle on the candlestick. She sat there, feeling inexplicably depressed. However, when she looked at Jean Hauser's overly handsome facial features, she suppressed the depression in her heart. It didn't matter. There were also times when she didn't care about anything when she drew. This was just right. She was going to France to compete in a while, so it was good to take this time to prepare more. Although she thought so in her heart, her face still showed a reluctant expression. The food in front of her seemed to have become tasteless. The moment Jean Hauser raised his head, he saw her expression. He picked up the wine and took a sip. He stood up and walked in front of her. He picked her up and placed her on his lap. Unhappy? No. Jean Hauser turned her face and looked at her. Shi Mengwan bit her lip. If you want to be busy, go ahead. It just so happens that I have something to do too. So, I've been very busy recently. She blinked. For some reason, she just felt that Jean Hauser wasn't telling the truth. But she didn't need him to tell the truth now. I'm going to France to compete next month. It just so happens that I need to prepare well during this period of time. Why don't you not come until I come back from France? With such a long time, it would be enough for him to finish his work, right? At this moment, her lips were suddenly kissed by Jean Hauser. He grabbed her waist and easily put his hand under the hem of her red dress. Shi Mengwan looked at him and reached out to wrap her arms around his neck. Not here. However, Jean Hauser didn't listen to her. He gently bit her lips and let go. Just here. His lips moved bit by bit to her ear. Not just here. There's also the kitchen, the living room, and the bathroom. Today, we'll do it in every place. Shi Mengwan felt her face burning. The hint in his words almost made her unable to control herself. This man didn't speak much, but the things he did and the words he occasionally said always made her feel that he was so indecent. However, she soon didn't have the energy to think more. Her body was squeezed open by him bit by bit. Her consciousness began to drift away from the ninth heaven. When Jean Hauser left Shi Mengwan's apartment, he put on his disguise again. He returned to his apartment at dawn. When he entered the apartment, he was not surprised to see the few cars waiting for him at the entrance of the neighborhood last night. There was a flash of darkness in his eyes. After entering the door, he removed his disguise and took out his phone to make a call. The other party only asked someone to follow him, but he didn't ask anyone to make a move. What did that mean? Was he looking for an opportunity, or did he want to play a bigger game? No matter which it was, he would accompany him to the end. The moment the call was connected, he walked to the balcony and looked down at the few cars below. Help me do something. After hanging up the phone, his fingertips accidentally touched the photo album. There was a photo on it that had just been taken today. The faint light of the morning shone on Shi Mengwan's face. She was sleeping on the bed, her entire person peaceful and quiet. After staring at the photo for a while, Jean Hauser saved the photo into an encrypted document. He put the phone aside. Shi Mengwan didn't expect Jean Hauser to really not appear. When she woke up, he was already gone. There was still the dinner left by the two of them yesterday on the table. However, there was no trace of Jean Hauser in the room. He didn't even buy her breakfast like usual. Her body was a little sore and uncomfortable. She sat on the sofa, curled her legs, and hugged her knees. She looked at the messy dining table for a long time and suddenly smiled. It wasn't like they hadn't been separated before. Why did she make it seem like they were separated forever this time? Shi Mengwan, don't be so pretentious. After a while, when Jean Hauser is done with his work, he will come to find you. In the next half a month, she didn't see Jean Hauser. He really didn't appear. Shi Mengwan's entry was almost ready. In a week, she would fly to France. Before that, Shi Mengwan went to Rong City to see Su Qingsang. Su Qingsang had been asking her to play since she went to Rong City in January, but Shi Mengwan wasn't free before. When she went to Rong City, Su Qingsang put down her work to play with her. In the evening, she also took her to meet Hua Jinyao's group of childhood friends. Unexpectedly, Zhang Hao's childhood friend, Wan Xianyang, seemed to be interested in her. Before the party ended, he kept asking for her contact information. For Su Qingsang's sake, she didn't want to refuse too obviously. She had no choice but to give him her WeChat. In the next 2 days, Wan Xianyang contacted her time and time again, saying that he wanted to be her director. Shi Mengwan had Su Qingsang to accompany her, so she pushed him away if she could. When she really couldn't push him away, she would call Su Qingsang along. Fortunately, Hua Jinyao's friends were all good. Although Wan Xianyang's intentions were obvious, he didn't go too far. This also made Shi Mengwan heave a sigh of relief. After playing in Rong City for a few days, Shi Mengwan prepared to go to France. The visa and procedures were all done. Although she was a little reluctant to part with Su Qingsang, Shi Mengwan still returned to Lin City first. After returning home, Shi Mengwan called Zhang Hao, but no one answered. She could only send a message instead. There was no reply. 2 days before going to France, Shi Mengwan went home to visit her parents. She told them that she was going to France. Although Shi Mengwan was worried, she had no reason to object to what her daughter wanted to do. Shi Mengwan accompanied her parents for a day. Before boarding the plane, she called Zhang Hao again, but no one answered. After boarding the plane, Shi Mengwan took out her phone to look at the local news while waiting for the plane to take off. However, she saw such a piece of news on the public account of a certain news outlet. Mr. Zhang Hao, a rising star in the city's technology industry, and Chen Feifei, the daughter of the Qin Corporation, held an engagement ceremony yesterday. Below was a detailed introduction about Zhang Hao's identity and Chen Feifei's identity. There was also the situation of yesterday's engagement ceremony. Finally, was a company like the Qin Corporation also going to start entering the technology field? The accompanying picture was of Zhang Hao, Chen Feifei, and Qin Yongchang's face. Chapter 675. Shi Mengwan sat there with her hand tightly gripping her phone. Her heart was beating very fast. She tried her best to remain calm, but it was very difficult. Love fascinates people, love makes people dizzy. She was blinded by love. She trusted Zhang Hao blindly. His heart felt like it had been lightly stabbed by someone, and it hurt slightly. Feeling a little uncomfortable, she put down the phone and clutched her chest. Every scene and every moment after her reunion with Zhang Hao appeared in her mind one by one. She pressed on the position of her heart to calm herself down. Shi Mengwan, you are going to participate in the competition now. Let's talk about these matters of love when you come back. The plane landed. Assistant Xiao Ji and designer Tong Yen came to pick her up. This time, she was participating in the competition in the name of her studio. Apart from herself, she let little Ji and Tong Yen come over first to play the vanguard. Sister Shi, are you too tired from the flight? Xiao Ji had arrived the day before. She had come in advance and arranged a car. Now that he saw Shi Mengwan's expression wasn't good, he thought that she was too tired from the long flight. Not bad. How have you been these 2 days? Not bad. The one who spoke was Tong Yen. She had been here for 2 days and looked around. This is indeed the fashion capital. It's quite rewarding. Well, it's good that we got something. Let's go back to the hotel first. Shi Mengwan sorted out her emotions in just a few sentences. She wasn't alone. She had more important things to do right now. After getting into the car, Shi Mengwan and Tong Yen talked about the competition again. The fashion design competition was held in Paris, the fashion capital. When Tong Yen arrived, there were already quite a number of participants. It was a gathering of designers from more than a dozen countries around the world. Among the people who came, there were already those who had passed the preliminary round. Next was the semi-finals and the finals. Every match had a theme. In order to complete the work, it had to fit the theme of the competition. Then, from these works that fit the theme, the judges would pick out the 10 that they felt were the best. Then the finals would be held among these 10 people. The semi-finals and finals would last for half a month. In other words, they had to stay in France for half a month. Shi Mengwan knew about this before. Although she didn't know what the next 2 topics were, she was confident in herself. Little G was booked into a hotel near the competition venue. Little G shared a room with Tong Yen. Shi Mengwan's room was right next to theirs. After entering the door, she motioned for them to rest for a while. She wanted to take a shower and change her clothes. When the door closed, Shi Mengwan was left alone. She finally didn't have to hide her emotions anymore. Throwing herself on the bed, Shi Mengwan's mood was extremely low. The afternoon of the second day Shi Mengwan arrived was the time to announce the theme of the semi-finals. After the announcement, all the contestants would be given 3 days to submit their works. 3 days later, the judges would use 1 day to vote and announce the list of people who had passed the semi-finals. Then, the submission time for the finalists was 7 days. The time given to the designer was quite short. Therefore, the organizing committee of the semi-finals did not require the contestants to design the finished product. Instead, they only required the contestants to draw the design. However, the works to be submitted in the finals included the design drawings, the source of the design, and the finished product. Of course, all the materials needed for the finals would be provided by the organizing committee. When Shi Mengwan appeared in front of Xiao Ji and Tong Yen again, she looked radiant again. She put on makeup and went to the organizing committee to fill in the form and get back the theme. The theme of this season is sweet. When she saw this theme, Shi Mengwan felt a little dizzy. She couldn't be sweet at all now. After she came to France, it wasn't that she hadn't thought of calling Jean Hausa. She wanted to ask him what was going on. How could he be engaged to another woman? But her dignity didn't allow her to ask. She retracted her thoughts and looked at the requirements on the design theme. Shi Mengwan bit her lip. Was it sweet? 3:00 was very tight. It was so tight that Shi Mengwan didn't have time to think about why Jean Hausa was engaged to another woman. In the past 3 days, she had hardly left her room. Every day, she had been drawing, and drawing. After 3 days, Shi Mengwan submitted the design draft. Before the judges voted, Shi Mengwan, who was extremely tired, told Tong Yen and Xiao Ji not to disturb her and slept for the whole day. Later, she was woken up by a knock on the door. She got up and looked at the time. It was already night time. She had slept for a while and her spirit had recovered quite well. It was just that she felt hungry after sleeping for too long. She was thinking about going downstairs to eat something later when there was a knock on the door again. She thought it was Xiao Ji or Tong Yen. She didn't expect to open the door and see Wan Xianyang standing outside. "It's you." Shi Mengwan had just woken up. Her hair was messy and her clothes were a little wrinkled. In such a state, it was completely unsuitable for her to meet guests. She resisted the urge to close the door and took a small step back. "Good evening, Mengwan." "Hello." Shi Mengwan's expression didn't look that good. "What's the matter?" Wan Xianyang stood at the door. "Aren't you going to invite me in for a seat?" "It's not convenient." Shi Mengwan's words were a little heartless. Looking at Wan Xianyang, it was obvious that he had come to look for her. "Okay. It's fine." Wan Xianyang wasn't angry. He placed his hand behind him. On it was a bouquet of extremely beautiful heart-shaped roses. Shi Mengwan was a little embarrassed. Wan Xianyang. I. Flowers for a beauty. Wan Xianyang forcefully handed the flowers to Shi Mengwan. You haven't eaten, have you? If you don't mind, how about having dinner with me? Shi Mengwan wanted to refuse, but Wan Xianyang spoke slyly. I asked the waiter. They said that you haven't gone downstairs all day. You didn't order food either, so you should be hungry, right? Shi Mengwan's brows furrowed, but Wan Xianyang seemed to know what she was thinking. I'm sorry, I made my own decision. However, the owner of this hotel is a friend of mine, so he gave me some convenience. His attitude was quite sincere. Shi Mengwan couldn't even find a reason to refuse. There's no hurry. Wan Xianyang was quite gentlemanly. I'll wait for you. As he spoke, he took the initiative to take a step back. With a faint smile on his face, he raised his hand gently and gestured for Shi Mengwan to help herself. Shi Mengwan closed the door in a dilemma. She looked at the large bouquet of roses in her hand and placed it on the coffee table. After staring at the bouquet of flowers for nearly a minute, Shi Mengwan suddenly smiled. Forget it, it was just a meal. Moreover, Wan Xianyang was Hua Jinyao's childhood friend. She would have a meal with him and then explain things clearly. Even if she wasn't with Zhang Haoze, she didn't have the intention to start a new relationship for the time being. He cleaned himself up as fast as he could and changed his clothes. When Shi Mengwan came out of the room, she was not surprised to see Wan Xianyang's stunned gaze. How about French food? Wan Xianyang suggested. Shi Mengwan felt that it was too long, but Wan Xianyang smiled. You came to France to participate in the competition. I think you haven't tried authentic French food during this period of time, right? Shi Mengwan indeed hadn't. She realized that Wan Xianyang was indeed a businessman. His ability to be watertight was even better than Xiao Qi's. Let's go. I know there's a Michelin-starred restaurant that tastes pretty good. It's nearby. Half an hour later, Shi Mengwan and Wan Xianyang sat in the restaurant. The environment in front of them was quite good. Shi Mengwan's nervous mood these few days was more or less relaxed because of this elegant environment. I came to France that year and accidentally discovered this restaurant. Later, as long as I came to France, I would definitely come. Shi Mengwan heard Wan Xianyang speak French to the waiter quite well. Her French wasn't very good, so she could only understand some simple greetings. Do you come to France often? He spoke French so fluently. Often. Wan Xianyang nodded and moved his body slightly closer. Do you know why? Shi Mengwan shook her head. She knew that Hua Jinyao was very rich. His friend wasn't a simple person. I told you last time that our family is in the antique business. You also know that over the years, there have been a lot of treasures in our country that have been lost outside. So every time there's an auction here, I'll come over. Shi Mengwan looked at Wan Xianyang and her impression of him changed. I didn't know that you were quite patriotic. How should I put it? Those patriotic overseas Chinese are very dedicated to these things. So I'll do my best. Shi Mengwan nodded. She wasn't familiar with Wan Xianyang, and Wan Xianyang didn't mention what had happened before. He only talked about some of the things he had encountered at the auction. This was a field that Shi Mengwan had never come into contact with before. It was quite new to her. For a moment, she actually felt that listening to Wan Xianyang's words was quite interesting. French cuisine was famous for taking a long time. Shi Mengwan didn't feel bored after eating the meal. Her nerves, which hadn't been able to relax from rushing to draw, were also relaxed a lot because of this delicious meal. After coming out of the restaurant, Shi Mengwan looked at Wan Xianying and thanked him very seriously. Wan Xianying, thank you. Thank me for what? Wan Xianying looked at her with a mischievous smile in his eyes. Thank me for treating you to a meal. You don't have to thank me. You can treat me tomorrow. Okay. Shi Mengwan didn't refuse. She should have treated him back. The weather is good today. Do you want to take a walk? Shi Mengwan wanted to refuse, but Wan Xianying made a gesture of invitation. She thought for a moment and followed beside him. Okay. The temperature in Paris was still very low at this season. It was only in the teens. Lin City was already in the 30s. But Paris was so cold. Shi Mengwan really wasn't used to it. Tightening the coat on her body, Shi Mengwan couldn't be happy when she thought that she would have to stay here for a few more days. Mengwan. Wan Xianying took off his windbreaker and was about to put it on her. Shi Mengwan was shocked and subconsciously took a step back. Wan Xianying's action of holding the coat stopped in midair. He looked at Shi Mengwan as if he knew that he was being abrupt. Sorry, I just thought that you would be cold. I'm not cold. Shi Mengwan felt that it was time to make things clear to Wan Xianying. Wan Xianying. She stood at the intersection and looked at his face under the street lamp. Seriously speaking, Wan Xianying wasn't bad looking, had good qualifications, and was a good person. But sometimes, feelings really couldn't be explained clearly. Wan Xianying. I know that it might not be appropriate for me to say this. You might even think that I'm being self-sentimental, but I really want to say that the two of us aren't suitable. Wan Xianying didn't expect her to be so direct. He was a little surprised, but after the surprise, there was a faint smile on his face. Are you rejecting me? I guess so. Shi Mengwan nodded. I just don't want you to waste time on me. You're not me. How do you know that I'm wasting time? But I don't like you. Shi Mengwan was very direct. Her personality was like this. If she liked him, then she liked him. If she didn't like him, then she didn't like him. Wan Xianying took a step forward and looked at Shi Mengwan's face. Before he came, he specially asked Su Qingsang to do his homework and asked a lot of people. Everything that happened today, whether it was what flowers to send or where to eat, he had carefully arranged everything. However, he didn't expect such a result. You don't like me, but I like you. I think that's enough. Maybe one day, you'll like me. That's impossible. Shi Mengwan's words were quite absolute. Wan Xianying looked at her. Do you have someone you like? Yes. Do I know him? No. Wan Xianying looked at her and suddenly said, You didn't deliberately make up such a person to make me give up, did you? No. Shi Mengwan didn't want to say more. Anyway, I have someone I like. I can't forget him in a short period of time, so don't waste time on me. There's something wrong with your argument. Wan Xianying waved his hand and didn't take her words to heart at all. If I don't succeed with you in the end, it'll be a waste of time. But if I move you in the end and you get together with me, it'll be worth it. How can it be a waste of time? Wan Xianying. Shi Mengwan was speechless by his words. All right, it's getting late. I'll send you back to rest. Wan Xianying. Let's go. Wan Xianying obviously didn't want to listen to her, so Shi Mengwan didn't say anything else. The two of them walked back along the road. Wan Xianying looked at the hotel building not far away in front of them. His attitude was different from yesterday. When they were about to reach the hotel, Shi Mengwan's foot suddenly tripped over something and she was about to fall. Wan Xianying supported her body in time. Are you okay? I'm fine. Shi Mengwan stood firm and was glad that she didn't wear high heels today. Thank you. Mengwan, you don't have to be so polite to me. Wan Xianyang was serious for a while before he became a little sloppy again. Shi Mengwan seemed to be used to him being like this, so she wasn't very surprised. She stood properly and didn't refuse when Wan Xianyang said that he wanted to send her back to her room. Mengwan, can I still come to see you tomorrow? I have something to do tomorrow. Tomorrow was the announcement of the shortlist. Only 10 people could be shortlisted. 1 week after the shortlist, she could bring 2 assistants to the venue specially arranged for the finalists. Whether she could be shortlisted or not, she would only know tomorrow. If she could, then she would naturally be busy next. If she couldn't, then she would really be free. It's okay. I know you're here for the competition. I can wait for you to finish the competition. Shi Mengwan didn't reply. After saying goodbye to Wan Xianyang, she entered the room. She walked to the sofa and sat down. Looking at the big bouquet of roses, her emotions were very complicated. She couldn't help but think of Jean Hauser again. During the time she was with him, Jean Hauser didn't seem to have given her roses. She sighed in her heart. Actually, it didn't matter what he gave her. It was only at this time that she could tell that Jean Hauser really didn't have her in his heart. Otherwise, why would he be engaged to another woman? She got up to take a shower and rest. There was a knock on the door. She thought it was Wan Xianyang who had returned. Without much hesitation, she went forward and opened the door. When she saw who the tall figure outside the door was, she closed the door without hesitation. However, her movements were still a beat too slow. Before she closed the door, Jean Hauser entered the door first. Without saying a word, Shi Mengwan began to push her away, trying to push her out. Jean Hauser easily pulled her hands into his arms and turned around. At the same time the door was closed, her body was also pressed against the door. Shi Mengwan was anxious. She raised her foot and kicked Jean Hauser. Jean Hauser held her hand and wanted to block her foot. She struggled very hard, so he wasn't paying attention and was actually kicked by her. After the kick, Shi Mengwan used even more force. She raised her other foot and kicked him. Although she wasn't wearing high heels, she was wearing a pair of pointed shoes today. It was also very painful to kick someone. Jean Hauser was kicked twice by her. When she was about to kick him for the 3rd time, he lifted her body up. In 3 steps, he carried her body to the side of the bed and threw her down. The soft bed made Shi Mengwan's body bounce a few times. Just as she steadied herself, she raised her foot and kicked his body again. Shi Mengwan. What are you doing? Even Jean Hauser couldn't help but press down on her body. He pressed down tightly and didn't let her move anymore. He held her hands together and raised them above his head, looking into her eyes. What are you doing? He had been very busy during this period of time. When he had some time to look for her, he realized that Shi Mengwan wasn't at home. She had gone abroad to participate in some competition. Am I messing around? Yes, if I'm messing around, you can go find someone who doesn't mess around. Shi Mengwan glared at him with a gloomy gaze. Jean Hauser, get lost. I don't want to see you. Jean Hauser's brows were tightly furrowed. Looking at the anger on Shi Mengwan's face, he seemed to be a little puzzled. Are you angry that I haven't come to see you during this period of time? Who's angry? Shi Mengwan didn't want to talk to him anymore. I don't have time to be angry with you. Get out of the way. I said, I don't want to see you. Shi Mengwan. Shi Mengwan closed her eyes. Yes, she should have understood long ago. Look at how Jean Hauser addressed her. He had always called her by her full name. Did he really have feelings for her? Did he really like her? Did he really love her? I'll say it again. Jean Hauser, get out. Chapter 676. I do. Jean Hauser didn't believe her at all. He only felt that Shi Mingwan's actions were because he hadn't come to see her for a long time and was throwing a tantrum. Call me. This person. Really? Shi Mingwan suddenly pressed the 3 numbers. After pressing it, the moment the call was connected, she spoke in fluent English. Hello, I'm at XX Hotel, room 1-3. Before she could finish her sentence, the phone was snatched away by Jean Hauser. He looked at her and couldn't believe that she was serious. Shi Mingwan. Do you know what you're doing? Of course I know what I'm doing. It's someone who doesn't know what I'm doing. It's you. She glared at Jean Hauser. She had been suppressing her uncomfortable emotions for the past few days. At this moment, she didn't want to suppress them anymore. Jean Hauser, is it fun to be two-timing? Is it fun to bully me like this? As she spoke, the great anger from when she knew that he was engaged surged in her heart. Without thinking, she raised her foot and kicked him again. Jean Hauser, who was shocked by Shi Mingwan's words just now, was still thinking about her words. He didn't pay attention and actually let Shi Mingwan kick him. Jean Hauser was kicked and had no choice but to leave her body. Shi Mingwan took this opportunity to quickly get up from the bed and dodge to the side. She sat up and looked at Jean Hauser with a defensive expression and resentment. Jean Hauser, you can't bully me like this. Perhaps because she had suppressed it for too long, Shi Mingwan's tone was filled with grievance. But very quickly, she suppressed this grievance. Let bygones be bygones. But now, she didn't want to continue like this. Leave. I don't want to see you. As she spoke, she pointed at the door, wanting Jean Hauser to get lost. Jean Hauser sat on the bed and didn't move. His brows furrowed slightly, as if he had thought of something. Two-timing. Who? At this time, he was still playing dumb. Shi Mingwan nodded and went forward to take the phone. After taking the phone, she quickly retreated, as if she wasn't afraid that Jean Hauser would pounce on her. She turned on the phone and found yesterday's news. She directly placed it in front of Jean Hauser. On the phone screen, Jean Hauser stood with Chen Feifei, while Chen Yongchang stood beside Chen Feifei. The 3 of them smiled brightly. The accompanying article was the news of their engagement. Shi Mingwan's gaze was slightly cold as she stared straight at Jean Hauser. Now that things had come to this, what else could he say? He said that there was nothing between him and Chen Feifei. He asked her to give him time. She believed him, gave him time, and the result. Jean Hauser's eyes darkened when he saw the photo. He knew about this photo. He also knew about this news, but he didn't expect Shi Mingwan to see it. Nothing to say. If you have nothing else to say, then leave. She didn't want to hear it from him either. It was true that she longed for love and wanted to be with him. But she didn't want to be looked down upon. She didn't want to be a shameful mistress. Even if according to the chronological order, she should have arrived first. She casually threw her phone aside. Shi Mingwan still had things to do tomorrow, so she didn't want to waste her time with Jean Hauser. Leave. Jean Hauser got up and got out of bed. Shi Mingwan thought that he was going to leave, but he walked to her side and hugged her. Jean Hauser. He didn't want to use this trick all the time. Shi Mingwan struggled up and raised her foot to kick Jean Hauser again. He dodged this kick, and Shi Mingwan used her elbow to hit his abdomen. She heard a muffled groan. She didn't stop. She didn't use much strength. What was he doing? However, when she saw Jean Hauser bend down, she thought he was pretending. Jean Hauser, go out. I don't want to see you. Jean Hauser didn't say anything. His hand kept covering his abdomen, and his face seemed to be in pain. Shi Mengwan was still calm at first, but when she saw that he was really in pain, she couldn't hold back the coldness on her face anymore. Stop pretending. If you're fine, go out. I don't want to see you. Jean Hauser shook his head. He reached out to hug her. Only then did Shi Mengwan remember the situation in front of her and pushed him hard again. He was pushed back a step by her, and his back hit the edge of the table in the hotel room. Shi Mengwan's lips moved. She wanted to say that she should be careful, but she thought that she didn't have much strength at all. He must be pretending. But when she saw the blood flowing out from between Jean Hauser's fingers, she was shocked and went forward without thinking. Are you hurt? Jean Hauser raised his head and looked at her. Ignoring the blood on his body, he reached out and hugged her. Jean Hauser, you. What was he doing at a time like this? I'm not engaged to her. Although everyone thought that way, this engagement was the wishful thinking of the Qin father and daughter. In the past half a month, there had been frequent movements. Some were aimed at him, and some were aimed at Qin Feifei. It was fine to target Qin Feifei, but there was only one. After all, Qin Feifei's uncle was quite powerful in Xi province. However, there were many movements aimed at him. Before he decided to come to France, half of it was because he did it on purpose, and the other half was because he wanted to divert the other party's attention. Therefore, when the other party came looking for him, he didn't avoid it. Instead, he directly accepted the other party's provocation. He deliberately took the knife in his stomach. The strength and direction were calculated accurately. It wouldn't be fatal, but he would suffer a little. Sure enough, after he was injured, the other party's movements immediately stopped. He probably didn't expect him to be so weak that he would be injured so easily. It was also because he was injured that the other party's movement stopped. That was why he had the time to come to France to look for Shi Mengwan. However, he didn't expect Shi Mengwan to have such a reaction when he came. Where are you hurt? Shi Mengwan didn't want to care about whether he was engaged or not. She remembered that he was very skilled. Ordinary people shouldn't be able to hurt him, so how did he get injured? It's a small injury. Since it's a small injury, let's go. Shi Mengwan retreated from his arms and didn't look at him at all. Get out. Jean Hauser let go of his hand and looked at his abdomen. He came to France and was wearing a casual suit. Inside was a beige shirt. The shirt was already stained with blood, and blood leaked out from between his fingers. Shi Mengwan turned her face away and wanted to say, "Get out," again. However, her absent-minded mind took a step forward and walked in front of Jean Hauser. She bent down and took Jean Hauser's hand away. She unbuttoned his shirt. She saw that there was a circle of gauze wrapped around his abdomen. The gauze was now completely red. She pursed her lips into a straight line and stared at the wound for a long time. She turned around and pressed the front desk to ask them to send the first aid kit up. When the other party asked if he needed a doctor, she thought about it and agreed. When the doctor came, she asked Jean Hauser to lie down. Don't stand. Lie down. The doctor will be here later. You're not going to chase me away. Jean Hauser's words made Shi Mengwan look sideways. She stared at his face for a long time and finally shook her head. After the doctor sees your injury, you can leave. Wan. Jean Hauser's address made Shi Mengwan's heart tremble. It seemed that ever since the two of them got together, he hadn't called her name like this. I'm not engaged to Qin Feifei. Shi Mengwan lowered her head in disbelief. Jean Hauser took 2 steps forward to approach her, but she raised her hand. Don't move. Lie down. The worry in her eyes was too obvious. Jean Hause looked at her for a while, then finally listened to her and lay down on the bed. His hand was still pressed on the wound. It was no longer bleeding. Soon, the hotel waiter brought a doctor up. Shi Mengwan was worried that Jean House's injury was too serious and that she wouldn't be able to handle it well. When the doctor arrived, she heaved a sigh of relief. The doctor untied the gauze on Jean House's waist. Only then did Shi Mengwan see that there was a wound about 5 centimeters long on his abdomen. The wound had already been stitched up, but it was still bleeding faintly. She wasn't sure if it was because she had pushed him just now or something else. At this moment, her eyes were a little red. The doctor treated Jean House's wound again and bandaged it. Finally, he gave some instructions on what to take note of. What surprised Shi Mengwan was that Jean House could actually speak fluent French. This made her unable to help but look sideways. After sending the doctor away, Shi Mengwan asked the waiter to change the blood-stained bed sheets. She looked at Jean Hause and wanted to chase him away. Jean Hause had already laid down on the bed first. Shi Mengwan took 2 steps forward. Jean Hause, you can't sleep here. You, Wan. Jean Hause reached out and held her hand. He looked at her with his usual cold face, but there was a hint of gentleness and fatigue in his eyes. I'm very tired. During this period of time, apart from those people who wanted to deal with him in the open and in the dark, he had also suffered a lot of interference in his work. Whether it was in Lin City or Qing City, he still had a lot of things to do. However, because he hadn't seen her for a long time, he ignored the injuries on his body and flew for more than 10 hours to see her. He didn't rest on the plane. Instead, he dealt with some very important business matters first. This time, he was really tired. Wan, let me sleep for a while. When he said this, Shi Mengwan finally noticed that other than the injuries on his body, there was a faint shadow under his eyes. Her lips moved. She wanted herself to be more heartless and harden her heart, but she couldn't do it no matter what. She could only watch as Jean Hause closed his eyes. His hand was still holding her hand. Sleep with me for a while, okay? Jean Hause didn't even open his eyes. He just held Shi Mengwan's hand and didn't let go. Shi Mengwan stood by the bed and looked at Jean Hause, who seemed to have lost a little weight. She didn't sleep as he wished. Instead, she withdrew her hand and took a step back. Jean Hause looked at her with half-opened eyes. At this moment, Jean Hause unexpectedly made Shi Mengwan feel fragile. Fragile? How was that possible? That was definitely not an emotion that should appear on Jean Hause. In her heart, this person was similar to a robot. How could he be fragile? Wan. He called her again. This time, Shi Mengwan decided not to be affected by him. She turned around and went straight to the bathroom. Her footsteps were very fast. After entering the bathroom, she quickly closed the door. She placed her hands on the edge of the sink and stared at her face in the mirror. Don't be soft-hearted. Don't believe it. That man was already someone else's now. If you were soft-hearted, it would be equivalent to harming yourself again. No. Absolutely not. Shi Mengwan was in a bad mood. She took more than 10 minutes to take a shower than usual before coming out. She was wrapped in a hotel bathrobe. When she saw Jean Hause, his eyes were tightly closed. His breathing was long and balanced, as if he had really fallen asleep. Shi Mengwan walked to the bedside and stood still, staring at Jean House's face. Many thoughts flashed through her mind, such as shaking him awake and telling him to leave. Or perhaps she simply went to get another room. However, when she saw the injury on Jean House's abdomen, she temporarily put down those thoughts and suppressed them. She closed her eyes and finally lay down beside him helplessly. She stared at the side of Jean House's face, unable to calm down. Shi Mengwan thought that she wouldn't be able to sleep, and she also thought that she would toss and turn for the whole night. But in reality, she slept very soundly. No matter how much she didn't want to deny it, she couldn't escape the reality in her heart. Where Jean House was, she could always sleep more peacefully. Early morning. Shi Mengwan woke up. When she opened her eyes, she saw Jean House's enlarged face in front of her. He was staring at her. At the same time that she woke up, he lowered his head and kissed her lips. Shi Mengwan subconsciously avoided him. She looked at him and moved her body to the side. Jean House supported himself with one hand on the bed. He looked at her movements and moved a little in her direction. Shi Mengwan quickly got up and sat 2 arms away from him. Her gaze shifted slightly to prevent herself from looking at him. Your injury should be fine now. You can leave. Shi Mengwan didn't plan to continue like this. Her body moved, but before she could leave, she was already pressed down by Jean House. In the next second, she was pressed down by him. Wan, I'm not engaged. He looked into her eyes and said very seriously. His eyes were deep and focused. To her, they were fatally attractive. She knew that what he said might not be the truth, and she didn't intend to believe him. She wanted to struggle, but when she thought that Jean House was injured, she could only stop. Really? Does it have anything to do with me? Shi Mengwan forced herself to turn her face away. Who are you to me? Whether you're engaged or not, and which woman you're with, you don't need to tell me. Jean House's brows furrowed slightly. Wan. Don't call me. Shi Mengwan seemed to have made up her mind. She turned around and looked at him. Jean House, you said that you're not engaged. Yes. You said that you have nothing to do with Qin Feifei. Yes. Then tell me, who am I to you? Jean House paused for a moment and looked at Shi Mengwan's delicate and beautiful face. He said 3 words very slowly, girlfriend. I'm your girlfriend. Yes. Was she not? Okay. You said I'm your girlfriend. Shi Mengwan suddenly reached out to hold his face and looked into his eyes very seriously. Then, do you dare to publicize our relationship? Publicize it to the entire Lin City. Tell everyone that you're my man and I'm your woman. Do you dare? Do you dare to let everyone know that I'm your girlfriend? Chapter 677. In a quiet room, 2 men were lying on the same bed. One was on top, and the other was on bottom. The posture was ambiguous, but the atmosphere was completely different. Jean House didn't expect Shi Mengwan to ask such a question. The air suddenly became silent. He still had an injury on his abdomen. After supporting himself like this for a long time, it caused a slight throbbing pain. His expression changed slightly because of the pain. In Shi Mengwan's eyes, this change directly became proof that he didn't want to admit his identity. Shi Mengwan sneered. It seemed that she was no exception to this result. She let go of her hand and gently pushed him to the side. She was about to get up when Jean House grabbed her hand again. Wan. Let go. It's not what you think. Jean House rarely explained to others. His brothers had been with him for a long time. There were many things that he didn't need to say or explain. They would directly execute them, and very few people would question his words. Then what is it? Tell me, I'll listen. Shi Mengwan waited for him to explain. Even if she really wanted to be with him, she hoped that she could understand his thoughts. Even if they couldn't be together, she hoped that the breakup could be done cleanly. Jean Hauser had been supporting himself for a long time. At this moment, he simply sat up and pulled her to sit up with him. His movements affected his wound. He snorted in a very low voice. Shi Mengwan seemed to have only realized at this moment that Jean Hauser was injured. She turned her face away and forced herself not to soften and not to give in. Wan, I can't disclose our relationship for the time being. Shi Mengwan sneered and turned her face away. She felt that it was a matter of course. She knew that this person was just saying it to sound nice. I'm sorry. Jean Hauser rarely said sorry to anyone. There were even fewer women who could make him say sorry. Jean Hauser thought of Jean Kuan, the Jean family in Qing City, and his current situation. He closed his eyes. Chen Feifei has heart disease. She can't stand stimulation. I owe her father a debt of gratitude. So, I can't leave the Qin family for the time being. Shi Mengwan turned around and looked at Jean Hauser. She just stared at him. She has heart disease. She likes you and wants to be engaged to you, so you agreed. I didn't agree. In fact, ever since Chen Feifei had a relapse, Chen Yongchang had been wanting them to get engaged. But he didn't agree. He didn't want to agree either. But later, Chen Feifei was almost attacked. Chen Feifei was scared half to death because of this. Her heart wasn't good to begin with, so Chen Yongchang decided to get them engaged. But perhaps she was afraid that he would be unhappy if he knew. Chen Yongchang didn't tell him. Instead, he said that the Qin Corporation was holding an anniversary meeting. The Qin Corporation's anniversary celebration was around the same time. As the general manager of the Qin Corporation, it was impossible for Jean Hauser not to attend. When he went to Juanxia, he found out that Chen Yongchang and Chen Feifei actually wanted them to get engaged to him, and they didn't reveal any news between them. At that time, it was impossible for Jean Hauser to leave just like that, so when Chen Yongchang asked him to go on stage, he could only go up. After that, Chen Yongchang said a lot of good things to him in private. After explaining for a long time, he finally said that if he really didn't want to, he could wait until Chen Feifei's body got better and then break off the engagement with her. As for the current situation, it was better to let Chen Feifei rest well and recuperate. This way, even if Jean Hauser didn't agree, it would still cause the fact that they were engaged. But in his heart, he didn't agree. Wan, it's not what you think between me and her. I understand, it's not what I think. It's just that you want to repay her kindness. At this point, Shi Mengwan sneered. But Jean Hauser, the Qin family is kind to you. Chen Feifei has heart disease. What does that have to do with me? Since you pity her so much and can't bear to part with her, then you can go to her side and take good care of her. Why are you looking for me? Wan, do you know what your behavior is called? Shi Mengwan said bluntly. A scumbag. Shi Mengwan. Jean Hauser looked at her, his face full of disapproval. Shi Mengwan smiled, but that smile didn't reach her eyes at all. Aren't you a scumbag? You're afraid of hurting Chen Feifei, but you're still hanging on to me. Do I owe you? Why should I swallow my anger like this? Or is it that in your heart, I'm so easy to deceive? That I can let you do whatever you want? I didn't mean that. But you've already done it. Shi Mengwan's face was full of mockery, and she didn't give in at all. Aren't you afraid of hurting Chen Feifei while hanging on to me? Jean Hauser looked at Shi Mengwan and didn't explain. In fact, he couldn't explain. Because of the real reason, he couldn't let her know at all. I'm not afraid of hurting Chen Feifei. I just don't want to be an ungrateful person. The Qin family is kind to me. Although I don't like Chen Feifei, I don't want anything to happen to her. Yes, you can't let anything happen to her, so you can let something happen to me. Shi Mengwan couldn't take it anymore. She turned around and was about to get off the bed when Zhang Haoze held her hand. Don't do this. Then what do you want me to do? Shi Mengwan shook his hand off. Accept the truth. Accept the fact that you have to take care of another woman's emotions when you're with me. Don't say you didn't mean that. Just tell me directly, how long do you plan to take care of her? How long do you plan to hide our relationship? Zhang Haoze didn't avoid this question. Instead, he looked at Shi Mengwan very seriously. It won't be too long. Give me some time, I'll solve it. Unfortunately, I don't believe you. Zhang Haoze's face darkened because of her words. Shi Mengwan didn't want to continue. She left the bed and stood on the other side of the bed. All right, that's it. Zhang Haoze, you go your own way, and I'll go my own way. He liked to take care of Chen Feifei, so he would take care of her. She wasn't going to accompany him anymore. She still had to go to the organizing committee to see the results of the semi-finals today, so she didn't have time to waste with Zhang Haoze here. After entering the bathroom, she washed up and changed her clothes. Shi Mengwan came out and prepared to leave. Zhang Haoze stood up at this moment. Wan, all right, Zhang Haoze. He had already said a lot today. Don't say any more. Either you break up with me, and we won't have anything to do with each other. Or you stay away from Chen Feifei. Go back to Lin City and announce that you're not engaged. Everything is a misunderstanding. How about that? Zhang Haoze's face darkened. At this time, he couldn't do that. While he was silent and hesitant, Shi Mengwan had already picked up her bag and walked to the door. When she was about to leave, Zhang Haoze stood in front of her again. Wan, Zhang Haoze, I'll say it again. Either you do what you promised me, or you leave this place. There is no third option. Her hand rose, and she thought about pushing him away. The moment she raised her hand, she thought of the tattoo on his body. Gritting her teeth, she walked right past him and left. This time, Zhang Haoze didn't stop her. When she got out of the door, she was relieved, but at the same time, she felt a sense of loss. She believed what Zhang Haoze said was true. He was such a proud person that he disdained to lie. But so what if what he said was true? What could it change? Chen Feifei had heart disease and needed him to take care of her. She was not in good health. Did he have to take care of her all the time? Take care of him one day at a time, and 1 year at a time. He really valued relationships. Unfortunately, she didn't want to waste her time with him. Sister Shi, you're up so early. Just as she went out, Xiao Ji and Tong Yan had already woken up and were here. Sister Shi, are you very nervous? I'm not nervous. Shi Mengwan shook her head. Compared to what she was worried about, there was really nothing to be nervous about. If we can pass, then we'll pass. If we can't, then we'll just play for a few days as a vacation. Thinking about it this way, there's nothing bad about it. Sister Shi, your mentality is really good. Xiao Ji almost wanted to worship her. Shi Mengwan smiled, and her depressed mood was suppressed again. Let's go. What surprised Shi Mengwan was that she actually passed the semi-finals. Among the 10 finalists, she was in the 9th place, as it was said that the rankings were not separated. This was really great news for her. Xiao Ji and Tong Yan were extremely happy. The two of them hugged her and congratulated her repeatedly. Shi Mengwan smiled. This was what they meant by frustrated in love, but successful in career, right? She passed the semi-finals. Next, the 10 people who passed were ready to participate in the finals. We've already prepared the venue for the finals. For the next 7 days, you need to stay in the place we've prepared. You'll draw here, make the finished product, and walk until you've finished your work. Because the venue is a little far, you can go back and pack your things now. Gather here in the afternoon. We'll have a car to send you to the venue. The people from the organizing committee explained the rules again. Shi Mengwan, Xiao Ji, and the others all memorized it very seriously. After memorizing it, they decided to go back to the hotel to pack their luggage first and then come over to gather in the afternoon. Shi Mengwan, Xiao Ji, and the others returned to the hotel. Xiao Ji stood at the door of the room and looked at Shi Mengwan. Sister Shi, do you want us to help you pack? No need. Shi Mengwan shook her head. You guys go pack your things. We'll go out for a meal later. Okay, Sister Shi. It's still early anyway. We can come back after dinner and rest for a while. Shi Mengwan nodded. Now, she just didn't know where the organizing committee would arrange for them. After entering the door, Shi Mengwan thought that John Hause had already left. She didn't expect him to still be in the room. Seeing that he hadn't left yet, Shi Mengwan's expression didn't look too good. Why haven't you left yet? John Hause stood up. Wan, don't call me. Shi Mengwan took a step back. Just as she was about to open the door and let him leave, someone knocked on the door first. Shi Mengwan was shocked. She stood at the door and wasn't in a hurry to open it. Instead, she looked out through the peephole. You're tuning into the LoveLore Library YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.